Romantic Tales. Chapter 282. Yili also paid attention to the psychology and thoughts of these soldiers who had been selected to be trained as spies. So when she taught them, she would add in some of the stories of legendary agents from her previous life. Even though she didn't mention their names, it made these smart soldiers understand the importance of the missions they would have to undertake in the future, and that as spies. Spies were not as bad as they thought. Sometimes they could even decide the outcome of a battle. The faint regret and dissatisfaction that they might have had in their hearts was buried by the new knowledge and skills that Yili had brought. Wang Fei, do you already have a plan for this group of people? Following beside Yili, Qin Feng asked curiously as he watched Yili bend over the table and write. Yili raised her head to look at him and said, "They can only be considered experiments. I don't know what kind of use they will have. Training a qualified spy was much more difficult than training 100 qualified elite soldiers, and it would take much more time. Also, I'm not very familiar with this area." Qin Feng smiled and said, "This subordinate can't see that Wang Fei is unfamiliar with this area. Listening to what Wang Fei has taught these days, this subordinate feels that it is new. There are many things that I have never thought of before. I really don't understand how Wang Fei thought of them." Yili looked at him with a smile that wasn't a smile and asked, "You really want to know?" Qin Feng stilled and couldn't help but shrink his neck. He shook his head and said, "This subordinate is just joking." The Su family had been scholars for generations. There were many famous scholars. It wasn't a big deal to have a genius like Wang Fei, right? Looking at the thick stack of files on the table, Qin Feng frowned and said, "Wang Fei, if you want to train spies, why do you only choose men and not women? After all, women are less likely to attract suspicion." Yili glanced at him in exasperation and said, "You think I haven't thought about it? How could it be so easy to find a suitable woman? Women don't have to be men. If it's a man, it's fine even if his appearance is mediocre, and it's less likely for people to be wary. But if it's a woman, she definitely needs to be extremely talented, beautiful and skillful. Otherwise, she won't even be able to get close to the enemy, let alone other things." Qin Feng nodded and said, "Wang Fei is right." Yili said, "In the future you'll probably still be in charge of this. You should pay attention to whether there are any suitable candidates. As for the others, I will be returning to the capital in 2 days. These are all things that they still need to learn. You can take a look at them yourself. When this is over, I will ask someone else to teach them something else. I have 2 spots for admission to Lishan Academy. Once their training is over, you can pick 2 and send them over." Qin Feng was stunned. Lishan Academy was a place where many disciples of Dechu State's prestigious families could not squeeze into. These soldiers at the bottom of the military did not have good family backgrounds. No matter what Wang Fei wanted to do, it was a great grace for them to be able to study at Lishan Academy. "Many thanks, Wang Fei." Yili waved her hand and said, "There is no need to thank me. Try to choose younger ones. In addition, if they can't pass the entrance exam of Lishan Academy, it will be useless." Qin Feng said with a smile, "These people's families are all educated. They are a little different from those rough men in the military. Knowing that Wang Fei is so kind, they will try their best to pass the exam." Yili nodded with satisfaction. When she was about to say something else, a sharp voice suddenly came from outside the door. "Yili, get out." Qin Feng frowned unhappily and said, "Who is so bold to make trouble in Great Elder Princess's yard?" As soon as Yili heard the sharp voice, she knew who it was. She smiled and said, "It's been so many days and she finally comes. It's not easy for her to make trouble. But now I'm afraid that everyone tolerates her. She can make trouble for a while if she wants. Tell someone to lead her here. Don't disturb my aunt's rest." "Is it Infanta Ronghua?" "It's Princess Ronghua." Yili corrected him. Although she didn't live in the capital city, what happened in the capital city was sent to her desk on time every day. The emperor granted Infanta Ronghua the title of Princess Ronghua and her marriage to the northern tribes. These days, Princess Jiaren's mansion was in chaos. At first, Infanta Ronghua thought that her mother and aunt could support her. When she found that her mother couldn't do anything, she began to make a scene and even went on a hunger strike. Princess Jiaren was so anxious that her hair almost turned white. However, no matter how mischievous Infanta Ronghua was, how could she defy the emperor's order? She was forced to learn the etiquette in the palace by the female officials sent by the palace every day. Infanta Ronghua was born in the royal family. Although she was not as strict as the princesses in the palace, her etiquette was not bad and she didn't suffer much. But why did she come here to make trouble today? Hearing the noise outside, Yili put down her writing brush and went out. As soon as she went out, she saw Infanta Ronghua leading people in. When she saw Yili come out, her eyes were full of hatred and anger. "Yili, you bitch, I'll kill you." Seeing Yili, Infanta Ronghua looked as if she saw the enemy of several lifetimes. She threw herself at Yili without any care. Yili frowned slightly. Qin Feng, who was behind her, stepped forward and blocked Infanta Ronghua 2 steps away from Yili. He said lightly, "Princess, please have some self-respect." The title of princess made Infanta Ronghua's face suddenly twisted. She angrily rebuked, "Shut up, do I need a servant like you to criticize me?" Qin Feng faintly raised his eyebrows and said, "Sorry princess, I'm a subordinate of the Ding King's mansion, not your servant." Infanta Ronghua had always been domineering. She was angry, but she didn't expect that a servant of the Ding King's mansion dared to be so rude to her. She was so angry that she couldn't speak for a long time. Only then did the servants behind her come back to their senses and rush forward to comfort her. Infanta Ronghua was upset by the noise in her ears. She turned around and slapped the people around her hard, saying, "Shut up, all of you." There was a sudden silence in the yard. The servants around Infanta Ronghua hurriedly kept quiet and didn't dare to make their master angry. Yili waved her hand and said to Qin Feng, "Qin Feng, you go ahead." Qin Feng frowned disapprovingly and said, "Princess, I'm afraid it's not appropriate." Yili smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, Infanta Ronghua won't do anything to me." Although Qin Feng was worried about the crazy Princess Ronghua, he still chose to believe the princess. After all, they were now in the yard of Great Elder Princess. Even if Princess Ronghua really wanted to do something, it was not so easy. As for fighting, Qin Feng didn't dare to say that he could defeat the princess. 10 of Princess Ronghua were not enough to deal with the princess. After Qin Feng left, Yili turned back and smiled at Infanta Ronghua, saying, "Princess, please come in." Infanta Ronghua was a little embarrassed by her kind attitude. She stared at her vigilantly and said, "What tricks do you have?" Yili smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry, I won't play any tricks on you." "Do I need to play tricks on a princess who is engaged in a marriage for peace?" Infanta Ronghua was so angry that her face turned red. Yili smiled and said, "Princess, you'd better sit down inside and talk." Chapter 283. In the end, Princess Ronghua obediently went into the parlor and sat down. However, her almond eyes were still glaring at Yili. Yili took a sip of tea and asked, "Princess, why did you come here today? Just to vent your anger? So I won't fight back. You can make a scene, curse and smash things as long as you're happy. But, what's the point? Can it change the situation now? Moreover, do you really think that you're marrying the northern tribes because of me?" Princess Ronghua was stunned, but soon she puffed up her cheeks and said, "Of course it's because of you. Who asked you to add me? Do you dare to say that you don't want to take revenge?" Yili raised her eyebrows and said, "Take revenge? You can think of it that way, but the order was given by the emperor. I just chose the most suitable person. In the end, the one who chose you was not me." Princess Ronghua said angrily, "Why didn't you cross out my name?" Yili looked at her with some amusement and asked, "Why should I cross out your name?" Was she familiar with Princess Ronghua? Did they have a good relationship? "I don't want to marry. The barbarians of the northern tribes are so vulgar and ugly." Looking at Princess Ronghua's proud face finally showing a trace of fear and weakness, Yili sighed in her heart. "Who wants to marry?" Princess Ronghua was stunned and couldn't speak for a long time. Yes, the northern tribes was not a good place. Who would be willing to marry a daughter of a noble family? Yili had no friendship with her and even had some animosity. Why would she help her cross out her name? Looking at Princess Ronghua stubbornly biting her lips and holding back her tears, Yili shook her head in her heart. Although she didn't like Princess Ronghua, she didn't hate her. Princess Ronghua was indeed domineering and arrogant, but at the same time she was straightforward. At least she was easier to get along with than those women who were full of schemes. "Princess, why did you come out of the city today? Did you come to beat me up to vent your anger?" "Do you want me to beat you up?" Princess Ronghua asked. Yili smiled and shook her head. The porcelain cup in her hand shattered as she said indifferently, "You can't beat me." Princess Ronghua glared at her angrily. She felt that this woman was treating her like a monkey. Yili looked at her calmly and said, "The marriage cannot be changed. If Princess has the time to be angry with me, why don't you think about what to do in the future?" A trace of sadness and helplessness flashed in Princess Ronghua's eyes. She snorted and said, "What else can we do?" She was waiting to be escorted to the northern tribes. When the northern tribes and the Dechu state fall out, they will either be banished to the cold palace or used as a sacrifice. No matter how spoiled and willful she was still born into the royal family. It wasn't that she didn't know about the benefits involved, it was just that she didn't need them in the past. Yili's eyes flashed. She put the broken teacup back on the table and said, "Princess, if you go to the northern tribes, you will be the crown princess of the northern tribes. As long as the northern tribes and the Dechu state have not fallen out, no one will do anything to you. As long as you are smart enough, you can survive in the northern tribes. In the future you may have a chance to return to the Dechu state." Princess Ronghua didn't believe her and snorted, "Return to the Dechu state? It's easy for you to say. When that time comes, who will remember a princess in a marriage alliance?" Yili frowned and thought for a while. She took out an exquisite jade pendant and handed it to Princess Ronghua. She said, "Princess, take this. In the future, if your life is in danger, the Ding Palace can save your life. This is a token. What do you want me to do?" Princess Ronghua was not a fool. Just as Yili said, their relationship was not good enough for Yili to help her. Yili said, "Take on the responsibility of a princess in a marriage alliance and the crown princess of the northern tribes. Do your best to assist the crown prince of the northern tribes." Assist the crown prince of the northern tribes? Are you kidding me? Princess Ronghua still had some self-awareness of her own ability. She could be an ordinary princess, but to assist the crown prince. Wasn't Yili thinking too highly of her? Yili said lightly, "You don't have to worry. Since I have said so, I will help you. If you trust me, in the future if someone comes to you with the other jade pendant, you just have to trust him. In addition, once you arrive at the northern tribes, you can reveal some information to the crown prince of the northern tribes. Let him believe that you can help him. Otherwise, you will be killed by him once you arrive. The crown prince of the northern tribes will not be happy to be the crown princess of the Dechu state." Princess Ronghua looked at Yili with a complicated expression. She was born in the royal family and was even older than Yili by 2 or 3 years, but she had never thought so much. Was this the difference between being the crown princess and being an ordinary princess? If the crown prince of the northern tribes knows that I have a relationship with the Prince Ding mansion, how can he trust me? Princess Ronghua asked. Yili smiled. "Find a way to let him know that you can help him deal with Yellow Yi. When Xiao Yao sends you to the northern tribes, I will ask him to communicate with the crown prince." "And why do you need the crown prince's trust? Do you really think that the northern tribes will accept a Dechu state as the future mother of the nation? Although the northern tribes is a barbarian land, they value bloodlines more than other places. For hundreds of years, the northern tribes have never sent a queen from a foreign country. There is also no king of the northern tribes who has the bloodline of the northern tribes. Of course, if you can really attract Yeluhong to change everything for you, I can also change my plan to support you." Princess Ronghua frowned in disgust when she thought of the rumored northern tribes people who were detestable. Although that Yelu Yi was not bad-looking, it was only not bad. There were thousands of men in Dechu state who were more handsome than him. Who knew what Yeluhong looked like? That Yelu Ping from before was as ugly as a pig. Princess Ronghua took the jade in Yi Li's hand and said, "This is only a fair trade. Don't think that I will thank you." Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled, "No need to thank me. But Princess should know that there are some things that cannot be known by too many people, right?" "I'm not stupid." Princess Ronghua snorted coldly. Of course she was not stupid. She knew that Yi Li was using her. But since ancient times, few princesses had good lives, let alone in a place like the northern tribes. At the very least, Yi Li had provided her with the means to survive. What did her cousin, who was high up in the palace, do? Other than sending people to teach her the etiquette that she had already learned, he did not even give her a word of advice. He only treated her as a flag that could be discarded at any time. Since that was the case, she could not be blamed for helping the Ding family. She also wanted to live. Yi Li nodded. "There is still some time before departure. Princess, you should go and see Xiaoyang royal princess and the empress more often." Princess Ronghua was puzzled. Yi Li smiled and said, "Those two are smart people. If Princess sincerely asks for advice, they will teach you a lot. I don't know what Zhaoran Royal Princess taught you, but after so many years, you don't need to learn anymore, right? Princess Ronghua was not angry at Yi Li's blatant ridicule of her mother. Instead, she thought seriously for a moment and said, I know. I am leaving. Right? If you have nothing else to do, you should return to the capital early. Be careful that your Prince Ding is kidnapped. After that, Princess Ronghua walked out proudly, leaving Yi Li alone in the flower hall. She was stunned, wondering if Princess Ronghua was joking or if she was serious about something. Chapter 284. After seeing off Infanta Ronghua, Yi Li handed over the training plan to Qin Feng. The next morning she went to say goodbye to Great Elder Princess and prepared to go back to the city. Great Elder Princess looked at Yi Li meaningfully and said with a smile, It's time to go back. You are the princess consort of the Ding state. How can you accompany me, an old woman, to live outside the city? What's more, it's always inconvenient for Xiuyao without the help of a princess. Hearing Great Elder Princess's words, Yi Li was slightly stunned and increasingly felt that there was something in the capital that she didn't know. After saying goodbye to Great Elder Princess and going out, Yi Li saw Qin Feng standing at the door waiting for her. She glanced at him with a faint smile and asked, Is there anything that I don't know about in the capital? Qin Feng's face froze and he said with a smile, If there is something important, who dares not to report it to you? Yi Li narrowed her eyes, tilted her head and looked at him with a smile, saying, So it's not very important? Tell me about it. Seeing Yi Li turn around and walk out, Qin Feng hurriedly followed her and said, In fact, it's not a big deal. Well, a few days ago the envoy of the northern tribes for peace marriage arrived in the capital. Prince Yelu wrote to the emperor that since the two countries are united by marriage, there should be a marriage to show the friendship between the two countries. Yi Li looked back at him and said lightly, So this time the princess of the northern tribes came and asked the prince to marry her, and she also asked the prince to marry her? What does the emperor think the king's mansion is? Why does he put all kinds of people in the mansion? Qin Feng shrank his neck. Was the princess really jealous? The prince would be very happy if he knew it, wouldn't he? Looking at Yi Li's expression, Qin Feng hurriedly explained, It's not the princess of the northern tribes. It's Helian Huimin, the adopted daughter of the winged cavalry general of the northern tribes, Helian Zhen. Yi Li couldn't help but twitch the corner of her mouth. Helian Zhen's goddaughter. Who didn't know that Helian Zhen and Ding King's residence had a deep hatred as deep as the ocean? And this goddaughter. It seemed that the other party was indeed very confident to dare to come to Dechu State with such an identity. Why didn't I know? Your Highness, please calm down. Qin Feng hurriedly asked for forgiveness. Yi Li glanced coolly at him. Qin Feng finally remembered that Wang Fei did not like her subordinates to say this kind of nonsense. He hurriedly explained, This is Prince's idea. The prince said that since your Highness still has matters to attend to outside, there is no need to trouble your Highness with such a small matter. The prince does not care about a mere northern tribeswoman. Yi Li nodded slightly to accept his explanation. She asked, If so, why did the whole city know about it? Princess Ronghua had been in the capital all this time. Even Great Elder Princess who lived in seclusion outside the city knew about it. Could not be said that this matter was not big. Qin Feng said, The Emperor and the Empress Dowager said that your Highness and Prince have been married for more than a year, but your Highness has gone. There has been no news. So they approved Prince Yelu's request, saying that it is for the king's residence to have more children. After saying this, Qin Feng carefully glanced at Yi Li. This was the real reason why they did not dare to report it to the princess. What a good idea. Yi Li sneered, Take a northern tribeswoman to have more children in the king's residence? Back to the city. She did not have racial prejudice. But even if she really could not have children, the people of Dechu State and the Mahist army would not accept that the future Prince Ding had the blood of the northern tribes in his body. This was purely a political issue. Emo Jingqi had a good idea. Did he really think that the people in the world were fools? Before returning to the king's residence, Yi Li heard many rumors about Prince Ding and Helian Huimin on the way. Among them, there was no lack of rumors about Princess Ding not being pregnant after being married for more than a year, but being unwilling to take a concubine for Prince Ding and being jealous and unvirtuous. As soon as they entered the king's residence, Director Emo hurried to invite Yi Li to the main hall. Yili raised her eyebrows in confusion. Director Mo explained, Prince Yelu and Miss Hellion Huimin came to visit. Prince Ding is talking with them in the main hall. Since your highness is the madam of the king's residence, you should come out to greet the guests. Yili looked at Director Mo with interest and smiled. Uncle Mo, don't you have anything to say about the rumors outside? Although those messy speculations made Yili unhappy, there was one thing they were right about. She was not pregnant after being married for a year, and did not have any intention of taking a concubine for Mo Xiuyao. In the eyes of the people of this era, she was indeed jealous and unvirtuous. Director Mo said calmly, how can a subordinate have the right to criticize a master's matters? Besides, most of the rumors outside were released by Prince Ding. What does Prince Ding want to do? Yili was slightly surprised. Thinking about it seriously, it made sense. In just a few days, the rumors had spread all over the capital and were even getting more and more intense. If the Prince Ding mansion had interfered, it would not have ended up like this. It seemed that Mo Xiuyao not only did not eliminate these rumors, but also added fuel to the fire behind the scenes. Director Mo said, Prince Ding said that when your highness returns, you will naturally understand his intentions. Right now, your highness. Yili smiled brightly and said, since the other person has personally come to visit, how can this consort refuse? Just as she walked to the door of the main hall, she heard a clear young girl's voice from inside. Prince Ding, does Huimin have the fortune to see your highness? Mo Xiuyao's voice was as light and gentle as usual as he said faintly, Li went out of the city to visit Imperial Aunt. I'm afraid that she has no fate to meet Miss Hellion. Prince Ding is joking. How could there be no fate? When Huimin marries into Ding King Fu, you and your highness will be sisters. There will naturally be a time to meet. Yelu Yi laughed loudly. Huimin, you don't need to be anxious. Princess Ding is gentle and elegant, and is the role model for women in Dechu State. She definitely won't make things difficult for you. Older cousin, you are right. Huimin has long admired your highness' reputation. Huimin was impatient and caused your highness to laugh. Hellion Huimin laughed crisply. Her words were natural and unrestrained. She didn't have the slightest bit of shyness and panic when a daughter of Dechu State talked about her own marriage. Marry into Ding King Fu? Mo Xiuyao doubtfully asked. Ding King Fu doesn't have any collateral branches. My father and brother have already passed away many years ago. Does Miss Hellion have a marriage agreement with that ancestor of the Fu? Yili couldn't help but laugh out loud. Mo Xiuyao still pretended not to know about the rumors outside. His acting was a bit too heavy. Lightly coughing, only then did Yili walk into the hall. When Mo Xiuyao saw Yili, he was obviously very happy. He personally got up and held Yili's hand as he smiled and said, Miss Li, you finally came back. Has your anger subsided and you're no longer angry with your husband? Yili faintly smiled and said, does Prince feel that he did something wrong? She secretly stretched out her hand and fiercely pinched Mo Xiuyao. Yelu Yi, whose back was facing Hellion Huimin, signaled with his eyes. What the hell are you doing? The strength of Yi Li's pinch was definitely not light. Mo Xiuyao's body stiffened and his face fell as he said, is Miss Li still angry? I know that I was wrong. As long as wifey feels that something is wrong, then it is wrong. Even if the world says that something is right, then it is still their fault. Wifey sit. His handsome face was still wearing half an ice-cold mask. In addition to the prestige of Prince Ding, this action of a husband coaxing his wife in an ordinary household was particularly strange in the eyes of outsiders. Hellion Huimin and Yelu Yi couldn't help but look at each other in astonishment. They couldn't believe that Prince Ding would actually act like this in front of outsiders. Chapter 285. Yelu Yi raised his eyebrows with interest and smiled at Yili. Wang, a long time no see. Wang Fei's elegance is still the same. Yili smiled and nodded. Prince Yelu is also not to be outdone. This young lady is. Without waiting for Yelu Yi to introduce her, Hellion Huimin stood up and performed the Dechu State's curtsy to Yili, smiling. Little sister Hellion Huimin greets Wang Fei Jiejie. Yili slightly frowned and leaned to the side to avoid this curtsy, smiling. Miss Hellion can call me Wang Fei. Speaking of which, Miss Hellion should be older than me by a few years. I can't afford to be called Jiejie. Yili finally saw Hellion Huimin's appearance clearly. Because she was born from the northern tribes, Helian Huimin was much taller than the Dechu state's women. However, her figure was exquisite, without the slightest hint of the sturdiness of the northern tribes' women. On the contrary, her facial features were quite delicate with a bit of the Dechu state's beauty. Only she was dressed in the pink of the northern tribe's aristocratic attire. The smile on her face added a bit of valiance and formidableness. On the contrary, she was somewhat similar to Murong Ting. However, with a glance, Yili understood that this Helian Huimin was completely different from the unscheming Murong Ting. On the outside, the straightforward and bright appearance was only a disguise. Just by that pair of charming eyes that had been focused on her face, Yili knew that this unscheming appearance was only a cover-up in a situation where she still didn't know her background. Hearing Yili's words, Helian Huimin was slightly surprised, but quickly reacted with a smile. Wang Fei Jejia may not know, but Huimin has already received the Dechu state's emperor's decree to marry into the Ding king's household in a few days. Although I don't know the rules of the Dechu state in our northern tribes, the first to enter the door is the eldest. Therefore it is only right for me to call you Jejia. Yili was silent for a moment. She turned her head to look at Emo Xiuyao and said, Prince, congratulations Prince, the emperor has personally bestowed upon you a beauty. Is Prince happy? Emo Xiuyao hurriedly shook his head. Wife, you've misunderstood. I have never received any marriage decree. Just a moment ago, I was still pondering whether or not Miss Helian had an engagement with royal father or royal brother. As such, even though imperial father and imperial brother had passed away for a long time, the Ding palace could still afford a ghost marriage. However, he would have to trouble his wife. I wonder, is Miss Helian Ai's concubine mother consort or little princess sister-in-law? When these words came out, even someone as calm as Yelu Yi couldn't help but have a distorted expression. Although northern tribes women didn't care about trifles, Helian Huimin couldn't help but have an ugly expression on her face when she was teased by her own fiancé. What do you mean you've never received a marriage decree? The emperor bestowed a marriage on the spot. He didn't even have time to write an imperial edict. In the end, Emo Xiuyao swaggered off without the slightest intention of giving the emperor and the northern tribes any face. After that, he directly locked the person who delivered the imperial edict outside the door. Naturally, there was no marriage decree. Yili's clear eyes slightly raised. Is that so? Emo Xiuyao sternly said, this husband's feelings for Miss Li can be seen by the heavens. My words are definitely not false. If I were to disregard my honor and marry Miss Helian, then I would be punished to be struck by lightning and have no descendants. In any case, he absolutely wouldn't go to Helian Huimin. Naturally, there was no pressure in swearing an oath. Hearing this, Yili's expression softened a bit. She softly said, I believe you. What's the point of swearing an oath? Since that's the case, I'll let people prepare the wedding. However, in the end, is it royal father or eldest brother? Do you want me to ask eldest sister to come back? Not to mention that she ruined Helian Huimin's reputation, the people of the northern tribes didn't care much about this. Moreover, she didn't intend to be polite to a woman who wanted to steal her man. Emo Xiuyao was obviously very satisfied with Yi Li's cooperation. He turned his head to look at Yelu Yi who was sitting to the side. He clearly wanted him to clarify whether the person Helian Huimin wanted to marry was the former Prince Ding, or the former Prince Ding. Yelu Yi's face was ashen. Emo Xiuyao had already linked marrying Helian Huimin with propriety, justice, integrity, and honor. It was obvious that he was determined to push Helian Huimin to a person who was already dead. If it really was as he wished, then they would suffer a double loss. Yelu Yi lightly snorted and said, Prince Ding, I think you also understand the intentions of I and the Dechu state's emperor. Don't you think it's improper for you to pester endlessly like this? Emo Xiuyao was even more aggrieved than him. He lightly sighed and said, Prince may not know, but I's ancestors taught me to never marry a woman from another country. Otherwise, I wouldn't be worthy of being a descendant of the Ding palace. But for the friendship between our two countries, imperial father and imperial brother have already passed away, but they won't be affected by the rules of the Prince Ding mansion. Isn't this the best of both worlds? Best of both worlds, my ass. Yelu Yi couldn't help but curse in his heart. Prince Huimin wholeheartedly admires Prince. Why does Prince humiliate me like this? Helian Huimin stood up and looked at Emo Xiuyao with hidden bitterness. Emo Xiuyao indifferently said, I have no intention of humiliating Miss Hellion. Hellion Huimin said, since that's the case, why does Prince repeatedly refuse? You and I are the emperor of the Dechu state. Although I, Hellion Huimin, am not born into the imperial family, I am still a noble of the northern tribes. I have studied literature and martial arts since childhood. I ask myself that I won't humiliate the prince. Emo Shuyao looked at Hellion Huimin, then lowered his head to look at Yili sitting next to him. He softly said, I will only marry Miss Li in this life. What does Miss Helian's actions mean to Ai's beloved consort? The three people in the hall were startled. Hellion Huimin looked at Yili with a complicated expression and said, Prince, for the sake of princess, you don't even care about the Dechu state? Yili frowned and looked at Hellion Huimin. What is Miss Hellion saying? Could it be that if our prince doesn't marry Miss Hellion, the northern tribes will send troops to invade our country? Hellion Huimin naturally wouldn't mindlessly respond to such words. She only looked at Emo Shuyao and said, I heard that the Ding Palace has always been loyal to the imperial court. Could it be that Prince wants to disobey the imperial edict for the sake of Princess Ding? Prince, are you not afraid that the officials in the imperial court will think that Princess is someone who brings disaster to the country? Emo Shuyao's face slightly darkened, as if he had finally put away the playful smile from before. He indifferently looked at Hellion Huimin and said, I see that Miss Helian's eloquence is not like that of a northern tribes person. Instead, it is like the people of our Dechu state able to speak eloquently. Miss Hellion, I only want to ask you a question. Hellion Huimin stared blankly. Even though she didn't understand why Prince Ding, who had always been gentle no matter what she said 2 days ago, would suddenly become angry, she still nodded and said, Prince, please ask. At the side, Yelu Yi frowned and somewhat vigilantly stared at Emo Shuyao. He felt that whatever he said wouldn't be anything good. Emo Shuyao's gaze was cold as he stared at Hellion Huimin's beautiful face until she turned her head away with a slight blush. Only then did he indifferently spit out a sentence. Miss Hellion, are you unable to get married? The atmosphere in the hall instantly became heavy. Hellion Huimin's still red face was filled with unconcealable astonishment. No matter to an unmarried woman, this sentence was definitely a deep humiliation. Yili looked at Emo Shuyao with some astonishment. She knew that Emo Shuyao's temper wasn't good, but he would never deliberately humiliate a woman. Even that impudent Princess Lingyun from Xiling last year, he also didn't say such harsh words. But as a woman and a wife, Yili couldn't help but admit that when Emo Shuyao treated Hellion Huimin so heartlessly, a trace of sweetness emerged in her heart. Chapter 286. Prince Ding, you've gone too far. Yelu Ye's face darkened as he stared at Emo Shuyao. Emo Shuyao glanced at him and smiled faintly. Where did Prince Yelu's words come from? Huimin was willing to marry into Dechu state for the sake of diplomatic relations between the two countries. Prince, even if you don't like my northern militant's noble daughter, you shouldn't humiliate her like this. I will report this matter to your country's emperor and will definitely seek justice for Huimin. Yelu Yi said with righteous indignation. Justice? Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and said with ridicule, I still want to seek justice. In the throne room, I already personally rejected the marriage decree. I also repeatedly stated that the Ding King's mansion only has one mistress. Prince Yelu and this Miss Hellion have repeatedly come to disturb us, even slandering and driving a wedge between us in front of Ai's beloved wife. Could it be that Prince Yelu doesn't know how important the mistress of the Ding King's mansion is? If Miss Li and I become hostile because of this, who can I find to reason with? If it was a woman from Dechu state, she would naturally retreat after being implicitly rejected. However, not only have you two visited every day, you've also spread rumors everywhere to ruin Miss Li's reputation. I can't help but suspect that Miss Hellion was forced to marry into the northern militant's mansion because she couldn't get married. The Ding King's mansion only has one mistress. If Miss Hellion insists on staying, it wouldn't be a problem for her to be a rough cleaning maid. Miss Hellion can't be a first-class maid. The worst of the Prince Ding mansion's first-class maids are all educated and courteous pure girls. Prince Ding. Hellion Huimin seemed to have recovered from the blow just now. Hearing Emo Shuyao's words, she was so angry that her face flushed red. Even her pair of beautiful eyes were rolling with sparkling and translucent tears. However, she didn't retreat or cry because of this. Instead, she turned her face to Yili, since Princess Consort received Prince Ding's favor, don't tell me you don't want to say something? Or will Princess Consort only hide behind Prince Ding and enjoy the fruits of others' labor? Yili sighed in her heart. This girl really wasn't simple. If a normal girl was humiliated so brazenly by a man like this, even if she didn't immediately run away in tears, she would have sobbed. But this Miss Hellion not only wasn't defeated, she actually still had the strength to retaliate. Blinking her eyes, Yili smiled innocently. Miss Hellion, isn't it natural for a man to protect a woman? With His Highness around, this consort naturally doesn't need to worry. This Fae and His Highness are in love with each other and do not want anyone else to come between us. Asking Miss Hellion to help us. It's common sense for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines. Your Dechu state also requires women to be virtuous and virtuous. Princess Consort, aren't you afraid of being criticized by others for saying such words? Yiluyi asked. Yili smiled. Our Dechu state requires women to understand etiquette, justice, integrity and shame. A woman who takes the initiative to ask for marriage is absolutely not acceptable. What's more, this consort doesn't like Prince Ding taking concubines. Whoever wants to criticize, just criticize. Hellion Huimin clearly didn't expect that Yili wasn't the slightest bit different from other women in Dechu state. Unexpectedly, she was so difficult to deal with on this issue. She gritted her teeth and said, "Isn't Princess Consort afraid that the Emperor will blame the Ding King Fu?" Blame? Yili's elegant brows slightly knitted. Just when others thought she was about to waver, she lightly bit her teeth and said, "In a moment, this consort will enter the palace to ask for forgiveness. Miss Hellion, no, anyone who wants to marry into the Ding King Fu is fine. This consort will slit her throat with a sword and give up the position of Princess Consort. At that time, Prince Ding can marry whoever he wants." Finished speaking, she raised her head to look at Emo Xiuyao and asked, "Prince, what do you say?" Emo Xiuyao's originally malicious expression instantly faded. He didn't care that there were still 2 outsiders in front of him. He pulled Yili into his embrace and said with a smile, "Beloved consort, you mustn't. If beloved consort is hurt in the slightest, I will feel the same way. At that time I can only crush those bastards who hurt beloved consort to eliminate the hatred in my heart." Yili nodded her head in satisfaction. She turned her head to look at Hellion Huimin and said, "Miss Hellion, you've seen it. Even if this consort dies, Prince Ding will not marry you." Hellion Huimin still wanted to say something but was stopped by Yiluyi. Yiluyi stood up and said, "Since it's like this, I'll have to disturb Prince and Princess Consort today. This one will take his leave first." "I won't see you out," Emo Xiuyao said indifferently. After sending off the 2 eyesores, Yili turned her head to size up Emo Xiuyao. She said with a smile that wasn't a smile, "To have such a beauty's favor, Prince Ding's luck with women is really not shallow." Emo Xiuyao looked at her helplessly. "To I, only Miss Li is a beauty. This is trouble that came out of nowhere." Yili frowned and said, "Why didn't the northern tribes mention this so-called political marriage before? Just look at how busy the Ministry of Rights has been these 2 months to prepare for the political marriage between the 2 countries. How could there be someone like Hellion Huimin who directly delivered herself to their doorstep? Saying it was a political marriage was more like child's play." Emo Xiuyao said, "Yiluyi only mentioned it after the northern tribe's political marriage envoy arrived in the capital. It shouldn't be the king of the northern tribe's idea, but rather Yiluyi's own impromptu idea." Yili didn't understand. Impromptu idea? If he wants to plant a spy in the Prince Ding mansion, isn't it a bit too obvious? Emo Xiuyao smiled and said, "Plant a spy? Yiluyi wouldn't do something that he knows is impossible. Even if he wanted to do it, he wouldn't do it so substandard. He just wants to make a big fuss and cause a bit of trouble for I, that's all. In any case, that Hellion Huimin is only Hellion Jin's adopted daughter. Who knows what her background is? Whether she's crippled or dead, it won't be a loss to him." Yili lightly snorted and said, "Since it's like this, Prince, why don't you explain what the rumors in the capital are about?" Emo Xiuyao smiled and said, "Are you talking about the rumors that Li is unvirtuous? I had people spread those rumors." "So Prince has been dissatisfied with me for a long time?" Yili glanced at him and said lightly. Emo Xiuyao smiled and said, "How could that be? I love my beloved concubine so much that she's unvirtuous." Yili raised her eyebrows. "When we return to the palace, you should be looking for me to talk, right?" Lily, feel free to go. If there's anything, just push it to me. I want the whole world to know that even if the chosen concubine isn't virtuous, she's still I's only beloved concubine. Emo Xiaoyao said in a low voice as he lightly hugged Yi Li's slender waist. Yi Li was silent. She leaned against Emo Xiaoyao's chest and slowly calmed the waves in her heart. The news from the palace came very quickly. It didn't even wait for the next day before someone came to summon Yi Li into the palace. The two people who were admiring the flowers in the garden didn't find it strange. Since there was such a show of marriage, how could the palace not respond? Emo Xiaoyao put down the brush he was painting and prepared to enter the palace with Yi Li. However, Yi Li reached out and pushed him back. The Empress Dowager is summoning me into the palace. What are you going to do? Emo Xiaoyao smiled and said, could it be that if the Empress Dowager doesn't summon I can't enter the palace? Yi Li smiled coldly and said, they want to talk to me, but you have to go. If they can't say anything this time, won't they have to spend time looking for me next time? Since it's like this, it's better to let them say it all at once. I want to see what they have to say. Speaking of this point, Yi Li was extremely depressed. She thought that she had married a husband that no one would come to steal. In the end, look at this year. First there was that Princess Lingyun, and then there was that cousin noble consort Lu that Emo Xiao had thrown out of the city. Now there was a Miss Helian. Did these women have nothing better to do, or was it that Emo Xiaoyao's face wasn't ruined enough? Chapter 287. Finding that Yi Li's gaze was fixed on his face, Emo Xiaoyao innocently rubbed his brows and said with a smile, since it's like this, Yi Li, be careful. Also stay away from that Yi Lu Yi. Yi Li blinked in surprise and looked in confusion at Emo Xiaoyao. Emo Xiaoyao was embarrassed by her gaze. With a soft snort, he pulled her into his embrace and lowered his head to bite her red lips, saying, in short, stay away from him. Yi Li smiled, Prince is jealous? Emo Xiaoyao didn't hide it and nodded, replying, that's right, so Wang Fei has to keep a distance from him. Yi Li withdrew from his embrace and covered her mouth to laugh. Prince, it's not good to be jealous. Without waiting for Emo Xiaoyao to respond, she had already turned and quickly walked away. Emo Xiaoyao gave a helpless laugh. With such an outstanding wife, how could he not be jealous? If it was possible, he even hoped that Li wouldn't go anywhere and wouldn't do anything. She would just stay in the Fu and accompany him every day. It was a pity that he knew this wasn't possible. Not only was the situation and the status of the Ding Wang Fu not allowing it, Li wasn't someone that anyone could truly bind. Watching Yi Li's figure disappear at the end of the corridor, the smile on Emo Xiaoyao's face gradually faded and was slowly dyed with a layer of killing intent. Political marriage, bestowed marriage? Did Yi Lu Yi think he didn't know what he was planning? Yi Lu Yi, offending I isn't a good idea. It seems that Yi Lu Ping's lesson wasn't enough for you to remember. Come, Prince. Reply to the person Yi Lu Hong sent. I agree to his proposal. His Prince. Zhangde Palace was still as magnificent as before, but Yi Li knew that ever since Li Wang's rebellion, the Empress Dowager's power in the palace had been suppressed by the Emperor. However, although the Empress Dowager favored Prince Li, she was still the Emperor's biological mother. The Chu state prioritized filial piety. Even if the mother and son were at odds, the Emperor still had to give the Empress Dowager superficial respect. Stepping into Zhangde Palace once again, Yi Li's state of mind was much calmer than before. Yi Li greets the Empress Dowager and the Empress. Stepping into the hall, Yi Li lightly bent her knees to greet the Empress Dowager and the Empress. Princess Ding, there's no need for formalities. Please take a seat, the Empress said softly. Yi Li gave her thanks and walked to the empty seat at the front. She looked with slight confusion at the noblewomen sitting in the hall and the calm Helian Huiman sitting across from her. Yi Li couldn't help but admire this woman. At this time, her face didn't have the embarrassment and resentment she had when she left the Ding Palace. Even the gaze she used to look at her was very calm and dignified. What day is it today? Why is everyone here? Is it this consort who came late? When one's status reached a certain level, one didn't need to be so restrained when speaking. With Yi Li's status, as long as she wasn't stupid enough to say that she wanted to rebel, even if she said something wrong, no one would dare to say that she was wrong. The Empress smiled and said, "You're not late. I am in the palace. Didn't I just arrive?" The Northern Tribe's envoy sent some Northern Tribe specialties to Muhu. Muhu wanted to invite everyone to try it. It's just that you haven't been in the capital all the time. Muhu just came back today, so Muhu ordered us to gather at Zhongda Palace. Yili smiled and said, "Thank you for your concern, Empress Dowager. I went to Imperial Aunt's place to stay for a few days." The Empress didn't seem to say anything, but Yili understood her meaning. The Empress nodded almost indiscernibly. She smiled slightly and turned her head to talk to the concubines beside her. The Empress Dowager smiled faintly and said, "You usually don't like to enter the palace. I have to take this opportunity to invite you to come in and gather with everyone. How is Great Elder Princess?" "Imperial Aunt is in good health. Empress Dowager, thank you for your concern." Yili smiled faintly and thanked her. A warm gaze fell on Yili. Yili smiled faintly and gave Madame Su, who was worried about her, a comforting smile. However, she sneered in her heart. These people had a good plan. Did they think that she would agree to their request because of her status? She calmly withdrew her gaze. Yili looked up and saw another gaze falling on her. Different from Madame Su's worried gaze, this gaze was extremely complicated and resentful. Without looking, she knew that it was noble consort Lu, who was sitting on the other side of the Empress Dowager. These days not only the Empress Dowager became haggard and older, but also noble consort Lu changed a lot. There seemed to be something else in her original indifference, which made the woman who was as cold as a pear blossom, a little unpredictable. Yili nodded slightly to her, but she just pretended not to see it and just stared at Yili. Her gaze made Yili a little uncomfortable and she frowned. "Princess Ding, Miss Hellion will be a member of King Ding's mansion from now on. Miss Hellion came from the northern tribes. Princess Ding, you should treat her well." As expected, the Empress Dowager said with a smile before she sat down and said a few words with others. That look and that tone was so natural that it was as if the matter of Prince Ding rejecting the marriage did not happen at all. Yili didn't plan to be polite. She didn't want to help Imo Xiuyao send away the concubines who sent themselves to his door. Putting down the teacup in her hand, Yili blinked and asked doubtfully, "Miss Hellion? Is the Empress Dowager saying that Miss Hellion agreed to be a cleaning maid in King Ding's mansion?" "Don't worry, the Prince Ding mansion never bullies the servants. This consort also won't casually argue with the servants." Cleaning maid. Even the experienced Empress Dowager couldn't help but be stunned and asked in confusion. Yili smiled and looked at Hellion Huimin and asked doubtfully, "Isn't it? Previously, Prince Yelu and Miss Hellion made it clear in front of me and Prince Yelu that he agreed to let Miss Hellion enter the mansion to be a cleaning maid. Now that the Empress Dowager mentioned it, isn't it the same thing? Did this consort misunderstand?" The Empress Dowager choked and said seriously, "Princess Ding is joking. With Miss Helien's status, how can she be a rough servant?" Yili was puzzled. Status? Is she General Helien's goddaughter? Being a rough servant with this status is indeed a waste. However, our prince said so. Although I'm a consort, I can't disobey the prince's wishes. I'm afraid that Miss Hellion and our King Ding's mansion don't have any fate. The Empress Dowager could naturally see that this was Yi Li's excuse. She frowned and said, "Princess Ding, how can you speak nonsense about the marriage that was bestowed by His Majesty? Just now, His Majesty asked Aijia to ask Princess Consort when King Ding's mansion plans to hold the wedding. It's best to do it before the Northern Tribe's envoy leaves. What plans do you have?" Yi Li pursed her lips into a smile and said indifferently, reporting to the Empress Dowager, "King Ding's mansion doesn't plan to hold a wedding." Once these words were spoken, the main hall suddenly became silent. Almost everyone's gaze gathered on Yi Li's body. Among them, the most intense were Hellion Huimin and noble consort Lu. Hellion Huimin probably didn't think that she would dare to refuse the marriage in front of all the noblewomen and the Empress Dowager in the palace. As a result, she couldn't get off the tiger. If King Ding's mansion insisted on not marrying Hellion Huimin, then her face would be completely lost. Meeting Hellion Huimin's eyes that contained anger and shock, Yi Li responded with a shallow smile. It couldn't be that she was usually too gentle, so this Miss Hellion thought that she didn't dare to refuse the marriage in front of everyone, right? Chapter 288. Princess Ding, what did you say? The Empress Dowager frowned and stared at Yi Li unhappily. In fact, the Empress Dowager now did not want to have any involvement with the Ding Palace. When her youngest son did not even give her a greeting and started a rebellion, causing her to fall into a dilemma, she understood that this son was unreliable. As a woman in the palace without a son to rely on, even if she had the ability to overturn the heavens, it would be a waste. Although her power had been taken away, the Empress had always been respectful to her, so she only wanted to enjoy her old age in the palace. Unfortunately, even if she wanted to retreat, her emperor's son did not want her to. So after Mo Jingqi was rebuffed by Mo Shuyao, he pulled her out, hoping to start with Ding Wangfei. The Empress Dowager was now an outsider and could see more clearly. She naturally understood that this Princess Ding was not someone who could be led by the nose. Although she did not want to offend Yili, she had no choice now and could no longer stay out of the matter. Yili smiled and glanced at Madame Su, who was not far away. She turned back to look at the Empress Dowager, her voice clear and firm. Empress Dowager, the Ding family has no plans to hold a wedding. In fact, as long as I am still Princess Ding, the prince will not marry any concubines. The hall was in an uproar. Ding Princess, how dare you? Princess Xiaoran suddenly stood up and pointed at Yili. As a woman, you dare to stop Prince Ding from marrying a concubine. You have no virtue as a woman. How can such a jealous woman be a good match for Prince Ding? Princess Xiaoran's only beloved daughter was sent to the northern tribes for a political marriage. Her heart was filled with anger, and she was usually dissatisfied with Yili. Naturally, she was the first to stand up and make things difficult for her. Yili lazily glanced at Princess Xiaoran. It seemed that Princess Xiaoran disliked her from the start. No, it should be said that Princess Xiaoran disliked Mo Shuyao, so she disliked her as well. Normally, Yili wouldn't mind if she gave in, but today's matter wasn't something she could let go of. Therefore, Yili did not plan on apologizing to her. With a faint smile, Yili said, "Eldest princess should be careful with your words. Our family's prince is not willing to take a concubine. As a wife, this consort naturally has to follow her husband's lead. Could it be that I need an outsider to force the prince? Since Princess Royal speaks of womanly virtues, do you know that a married woman should obey her husband?" Princess Xiao Ren's face alternated between green and white. Who in the capital didn't know that Princess Xiao Ren couldn't give birth to a son and that she controlled the prince consort and prohibited him from getting close to the concubines? That was why the prince consort didn't have a son even though he was 40 years old this year. Fortunately, the prince consort was only the second son of the first wife. If it was the eldest grandson, even the eldest princess would not be able to suppress the dissatisfaction of the aristocratic families. At this moment, the words of virtue coming out of her mouth sounded a bit sarcastic. Princess Xiaoran gave a snort with a calm face and said, "Even if it's like this, as the Ding King's princess, you should think of the Prince Ding Mansion's children and help the King's mansion spread its branches. Even if the prince was confused and refused to take a concubine as the princess, if you don't know how to persuade him, you can't be called virtuous." Yili looked up and said with a faint smile, "When did this consort say that I could be called virtuous? If being a virtuous consort means finding a beautiful concubine for my husband when I have nothing to do, then I'm sorry, this consort is not virtuous and does not plan on being virtuous." You. Princess Xiaoran was so angry that she couldn't think straight. She pointed at Yili with a trembling finger and couldn't say anything for a while. Yili did not avoid it and raised her brows at her with a smile. The empress in the hall saw that the eldest princess was about to faint from anger and a trace of a smile appeared in her eyes. She said, "All right, if you have something to say, just say it. Eldest princess, don't be angry. Princess Ding, the elders have taught you not to be rude." Yili nodded and respectfully said, "The matter of the empress's teachings, Yili will definitely remember the elders' teachings and follow the eldest princess' example. I won't dare to disobey." The Empress Dowager frowned and lightly coughed. She looked at Yili and said, "Princess Ding, this time, the emperor bestowing Miss Hulian's marriage is both a family matter and a national matter. Princess Ding should prioritize national matters and cannot be willful." Yili's heart couldn't help but be angry. What was going on with these people? If it was the men themselves who were unfaithful, then it would be fine. These women were also unwilling to stop stuffing women into other people's food. They were clearly forcing the men to be unfaithful. They themselves liked virtuous women. She didn't love them. Did they have to drag her along? Yili stood up and coldly said, "The Empress Dowager is joking. How can a marriage between two countries be so careless? At the time of the marriage, the king of the northern tribes never mentioned sending people to marry with the Ding royal family. If it really is a national matter, then where is the letter of credence for the northern tribes' marriage? If there isn't a letter of credence, then is it a private decision made by some people? What kind of place does the Empress Dowager think the Ding royal family is? Is it a place where anyone can enter as they wish? If Miss Hellion wants to enter the Ding royal family, you can. The Prince Ding Mansion's sweeping maid position is waiting for you. You want to enter the Prince Ding Mansion with an insignificant status as a goddaughter? Miss Hellion, first give me a clear status before speaking to the imperial consort. Hellion Huimin stood up, her elegant face full of anger. Even if you are the Ding royal consort, this lady is still a noble lady of the northern tribes. How can I allow you to wantonly humiliate me? Noble lady of the northern tribes? Yi Li disdainfully raised her eyebrows. The imperial consort, I still haven't heard that the noble lady's identity is so-and-so's goddaughter. A noble lady who can't even reveal the background of her biological parents? Everyone present understood the meaning behind Yi Li's words. In the Dechu state, even if the status of a godfather was much higher than one's biological parents, when speaking to others, one must first mention one's biological parents. At most, one would add the phrase so-and-so's goddaughter at the end. However, Hellion Huimin completely didn't mention the identity of her biological parents. This could only prove that the status of Hellion Huimin's parents wasn't as simple as being ordinary. It should be extremely low. Thinking about some of the customs of the northern tribes, there weren't many nobles of the northern tribes who looked as dignified as Yelu Yi. Most of the nobles of the northern tribes didn't look good in the eyes of the Dechu state's aesthetic standards. On the contrary, those who looked good in the northern tribes were mostly slaves. In other words, those who were sold or captured from other countries to the northern tribes. Among them, many were the descendants of the Dechu state's people. Thus, Hellion Huimin didn't even mention the identity of her biological parents. It couldn't help but make people suspect that she was the descendant of the slaves of the northern tribes. If that was really the case, even if the Ding king's household really married her as a concubine, it would be a huge joke. The noble women's gazes towards Hellion Huimin couldn't help but become subtle. In that subtle gaze, there was an additional bit of disgust and contempt. The status of the slaves of the northern tribes and the servants of the Dechu state were even lower. Not only were they killed at will, but they also specialized in doing some rough work that normal people weren't willing to do. Furthermore, there was no such thing as moonlighting. Many female slaves were also played with and abused by their masters. Hellion Huimin was also an extremely intelligent person. How could she not notice the changes in the gazes of the people present? She looked at Yi Li with even more resentment in her eyes. The Empress Dowager hesitantly looked at Hellion Huimin. She also didn't know what Hellion Huimin's true identity was. If that was really the case, if Hellion Huimin's true identity was spread out, it would only cause the entire court to be dissatisfied with the emperor's decree for the marriage. It would even cause the military to think that the emperor was purposely trying to humiliate the Ding king's household. Princess consort, I'm afraid you've filtered it out. Since the northern tribes and our Dechu state are on good terms, they naturally wouldn't not understand our Dechu state's customs. The girl sent over for the marriage naturally has a noble status. Presumably Miss Hellien's parents died when she was young and she grew up in the general Hellion household, so she's used to it? Miss Hellion, how can you casually draw your blade in front of the Empress Dowager? Quickly put it down. The Empress frowned and reprimanded. On the side, noble consort Lu said lightly, just now when Princess Ding drew her sword, Her Majesty didn't reprimand her. The Empress smiled faintly and said, younger sister, have you forgotten that our ancestors have instructed Prince Ding and Princess Ding to carry swords in the palace? Noble consort Lu snorted and turned her head away, ignoring the Empress. The Empress also did not argue with her and smiled faintly. Looking at Hellion Huimin, who was holding the gorgeously decorated scimitar, Yi Li pursed her lips and smiled. Hellion Huimin frowned and said, what are you smiling about? Yi Li smiled and said, speaking of which, there are quite a few women who are eyeing my prince covetously. Today, consort, I will use you as an example. Shameless boasting. Hellion Huimin sneered disdainfully and waved the scimitar in her hand towards Yi Li. Yi Li casually moved to the side, but Hellion Huimin did not relax and continued to wave the scimitar from behind her. Hellion Huimin was indeed a woman who grew up in the grasslands. Compared to the women of the Central Plains, her scimitar was vigorous and full of strength. Yili waited until she had waved the scimitar a dozen times before she laughed crisply and said, "Is Miss Hellion done? Next it's Consort Ai's turn." Compared to Hellion Huiman's majestic aura, Yili's moves were extremely ordinary. The crowd didn't even understand what was going on. They only saw Yili already closing in on Hellion Huiman, one hand grabbing Hellion Huiman's retreating hand, and with a kick, kicking away Hellion Huiman's kick. Her other hand flashed a cold light and mercilessly stabbed towards Hellion Huiman's chest. "Princess Ding, have mercy!" The Empress Dowager and the Empress shouted in unison. Hellion Huiman found that she could not break free from Yili's grip and could only close her eyes and wait for death. She was not reconciled. She believed that her martial arts were the best among the women of the northern tribes, but she had lost to a woman from the Dechu state. She did not even have time to see her moves clearly, but this was not important. Even if she was not reconciled to her loss, what awaited her was death. After waiting for a while, the expected pain did not come. Hellion Huiman opened her eyes in confusion and saw that Yili had unceremoniously pushed her to the side and calmly put away the scimitar in her hand. Hellion Huiman had walked through the gates of hell, but she was still somewhat in a daze. She could feel that Princess Ding did not just want to scare her. That murderous aura that hit her in the face was enough for her to clearly understand that she had just narrowly escaped with her life. After receiving such a blow, Hellion Huiman could not say anything for a while. She could only stand in the hall in a daze. The Empress Dowager's face was green with anger. She stood up and said, "Princess Ding, you have big guts. Forget it. Aija is old, I can't manage these things. Empress, I'll leave the rest to you. Aija will go back first." After speaking, the Empress Dowager rubbed her chest and called for the palace maids beside her to help her leave. The Empress Dowager gave up and the Empress could only bitterly smile. Noble Consort Lu looked at the Empress and asked, "Empress, how should we deal with this?" The Empress smiled and said, "Naturally, we will report to the Emperor and then make a decision. But after today, I think this matter will not be difficult to solve. Younger sister, don't you think so?" If Hellion Huiman still dared to want to marry into the Ding Prince's mansion, then she could only admire her. Noble Consort Lu lowered her head to look at Yili, who was below His Highness. Her eyes were more complex and deep. The Empress ignored her and only smiled and said, "I still like Princess Ding's temperament. She doesn't make a sound, but she amazes everyone with a single brilliant feat. She handles things cleanly and efficiently. Presumably, those who want to marry their daughters into the Prince Ding mansion will have to think twice." Facing Yili, who was below His Highness, she smiled faintly. Her eyes were filled with envy and admiration. Yili, who was under everyone's gaze, played with the sharp blade in her hand without care. Since this kind of matter could not be settled, then it would be settled cleanly once and for all. When they left Zhangde Palace, the noble ladies looked at Yili with a strange expression. There was envy, jealousy, fear and schadenfreude in their eyes. Not to mention that the Dechu state had been founded for more than 100 years. Even in the past several thousand years, there was no woman who dared to draw a blade in front of the Empress Dowager and Empress and say that she would kill all the women who wanted to be her husband's concubine. This boldness and courage naturally made these noble women who had to endure groups of concubines at home envious and jealous. At the same time, everyone knew that being chosen as the king's consort meant that she was destined to bear the infamy of being a jealous woman. Liger. Yili had just stepped out of the hall when Su Furen was already waiting outside. Yili smiled faintly and greeted her, "Aunt." Su Furen looked at her and sighed. She shook her head and said, "You girl." Yili lowered her head and smiled, "Lier has embarrassed Aunt." Chapter 290. Lady Su pulled her hand and laughed softly as she walked out. "Why would our Su family care about these false reputation? Aunt is also a woman, how can you not understand a woman's thoughts?" But Prince Ding sighed. Lier was indeed daring in the palace today, but with her status as the imperial consort, she wouldn't be charged with any serious crime. The so-called marriage was a family matter. As long as Prince Ding was willing to protect her, she would be fine. But if Prince Ding was dissatisfied with her actions today, then Lier's future days would not be easy. Yili blinked and looked at Lady Su's worried eyes. She hugged Lady Su's arm and intimately leaned on her with a smile. "Aunt, don't worry. I'll be fine. Aunt, when you go back you have to put in a good word for Lier in front of second uncle. Le's second uncle wants to teach Lear a lesson. Lady Sue raised her hand to pat her and laughed softly. You're too daring. No wonder your uncle wants to teach you a lesson. Just now in the palace you scared me quite a bit. Lady Sue came from a scholarly family and had never seen anyone brandish a sword in front of her. Just now in the palace when she saw Helian Huimin brandishing a sword towards Yi Li, if it wasn't for her usual self-control, she would have screamed on the spot. Lear knows her mistake. I won't do it in the future. Yi Li hugged Lady Sue's arm and acted coquettishly. Just as she accompanied Lady Sue out of the palace gate, she saw the curtain of the Ding Palace's carriage being opened from the inside. A handsome man in a white gown stepped out of the carriage with his head lowered and smiled at Yi Li at the palace gate. Lear. Although the noblewomen passing by could not stop and watch, they also saw Prince Ding smiling and reaching out his hand to the princess consort. They didn't believe that Prince Ding didn't know what happened in the palace. It seemed that Prince Ding only had the princess consort in his heart. Even though Princess Ding made such a domineering and willful declaration in the palace, which almost made Prince Ding lose face, Prince Ding still doted on her as before. Madame Sue pulled Yi Li forward and bowed. Emo Xiaoyao stepped aside slightly and said with a laugh, Madame is Yi Li's Jimu, we're family, there's no need to be so courteous. Madame Sue laughed and said, etiquette must not be discarded. Yi Li is young and immature. I hope that Prince will be magnanimous enough to forgive her. Emo Xiaoyao looked at Yi Li with a smile and said, Madame worries too much, Li is very good. Why are you here? Yi Li asked, puzzled. Emo Xiaoyao laughed in a low voice and said, I heard that Nyangzi drew her saber in Zhangde Palace and was so angry that it shocked everyone. Isn't your husband worried about your safety? Yi Li couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. If he was worried about her safety, why didn't he enter the palace to find her? Who was he putting on an act for? Madame Sue looked at the two's conversation and there was a trace of relief in her eyes. With one glance she could see that Prince Ding really didn't care about Li Er's actions in the palace, and it could even be said that he was very happy about it. With a smile, Madame Sue bid farewell to the two and walked towards her own carriage with a peace of mind. When the Prince Ding mansion's carriage left, the palace gate gradually regained its peace. Not far from the city walls, Yellow Yi brought Helian Huimin and silently watched the Ding mansion's carriage leave. After a long time Helian Huimin said with some unwillingness, Cousin, are we just going to let it go like this? Yellow Yi glanced at her with a smile that wasn't a smile and said, If we don't let it go, what can you do? You can't hook up with Prince Ding and you can't deal with the Prince Ding mansion. Or do you really want to go to the Ding mansion to be a cleaning maid? Don't forget what happened to 11 because of Mo Shuyao. Do you think he's a soft-hearted person? Thinking of the 11th Prince Yelu Ping who was still a fool, Helian Huimin couldn't help but shiver. She didn't dare to think about how a person who wasn't injured or poisoned would turn from a normal person into a fool. How much inhumane torture did Yelu Ping suffer? And all of this was because Yelu Ping said something that shouldn't be said at Mo Xiuyao's wedding. Then, what should we do now? Helian Huimin asked with some worry. Yelu Yi didn't care and said, Of course we wait to welcome the princess back to the northern tribes. But Helian Huimin frowned. Yelu Yi lightly said, Marrying you into the Ding mansion was originally a spur-of-the-moment decision. The success rate is less than 30%, and this 30% still depends on the Ding country's princess consort. Now it seems that there isn't even a 5% chance. You should go back to the northern tribes and obediently be the crown prince's concubine. Helian Huimin's face changed greatly and said in panic, No, cousin, the crown prince will kill me. Also, what happened in the Dechu state will definitely spread back to the northern tribes. The crown prince won't want me. The crown prince's concubine. The northern tribes and the Dechu state's rules and etiquette were completely different. The concubines below the crown prince's concubine would all become the crown prince's concubine, but all of them were the crown prince's concubine's slaves. If her status was noble and her birth was noble, then it would be better. But for a woman who was born a slave, even if she became the crown prince's concubine, she still wasn't allowed to have children. She also wasn't allowed to have her own property and had no freedom. Other than when the crown prince was having sex, she was no different from an ordinary female slave. Even if she was beaten to death as her adoptive father Helian Jun couldn't say anything. What's more, the crown prince and Yelu Ye's party had a deep grudge. The women who were sent to the crown prince's mansion by Yelu Yi would usually be sent out in less than half a month. Helian Huimin couldn't help but tremble in her dreams at night. So this time when Yellow Yi came to the Dechu state to escort the bride, she thought of a way to follow. When Yellow Yi said that he planned to send her to the Prince Ding mansion, she didn't hesitate to agree. Sometimes she even thought that as long as she didn't return to the northern tribes, even if she stayed in the Dechu state as a servant girl with her ability, she wouldn't be afraid of not being able to rise up one day. But if she returned to the northern tribes, what awaited her was only the word death. Don't have any bad ideas. The Helian family raised you for so many years, you can't be wasted, right? Glancing at the silent Helian Huimin, Yellow Yi lightly said, "Don't worry, there aren't many people who have seen you. Princess Ronghua also hasn't seen you. As for your name, it's fine as long as you change it. In any case, uncle has more than one goddaughter. Since you can't deal with Prince Ding, then obediently accept your fate and go to the Crown Prince's mansion. I already gave you a chance." Helian Huimin's heart trembled. She knew Yellow Ye's methods. She hurriedly said with a trembling voice, "I understand." Yellow Yi sized her up before nodding in satisfaction and turning to leave. If it wasn't for the fact that Helian Huimin had the best aptitude among the women in Uncle's mansion, she wouldn't have needed to go back alive if this plan failed. However, although Helian Huimin was smart compared to Princess Ding, she was still far from enough. Thinking of the information collected these days in the Chu capital, this Princess Ding not only came from a noble background, but was also skilled in literature and martial arts. It was even said that in Yongzhou, she led the Black Cloud cavalry to guard the city until Prince Ding's reinforcements arrived. It could be said that her contributions couldn't go unnoticed. A woman who could be betrothed to the Black Cloud cavalry. The betrothal between the northern tribes and the Ding King's mansion was left unsettled. However, the Ding King's consort's reputation as a fierce woman spread throughout the capital overnight. She dared to hold a dagger in front of the Empress Dowager and say that she wanted to enter the Ding King's mansion. If one came, she would kill one. If two came, she would kill a pair. No one in the capital dared to provoke this woman. What was even more frightening was that Prince Ding didn't have the slightest bit of anger towards the princess consort's announcement. Instead, he would occasionally accompany his beloved wife to tour the capital. That affectionate appearance clearly told people that if the women who wanted to enter the mansion as concubines were really killed by Princess Ding, His Highness Prince Ding would definitely not stand up for them. For a moment, Prince Ding said that Prince Ding loved his wife like his life. There were also people who were henpecked. However, no matter how the rumors spread outside, it still didn't affect the two people involved in this matter. At this time, Yili didn't have the time to care about these rumors. When the full moon rose into the night sky, Yili's heart that had been hanging tightened even more. Chapter 291. Not long after dinner, Emo Xiuyao's face gradually became ugly. Yili quickly asked Xinyang to come over. Xinyang was silent for a long time and only said one word: endure. The side effects of using the phoenix tail grass were incurable and could only be endured by himself. Li, go rest in the side hall. Seeing Yi Li's stiff face, Emo Xiuyao said softly. It would not look good when it flared up. He did not want to be too embarrassed in front of her and did not want to scare her. Yi Li calmly sat by his side and firmly said, I'll accompany you, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Emo Xiuyao could not help but want to laugh, but his heart wanted to cry even more. 8 or 9 years, countless times he was on the brink of death. Countless times he was in so much pain that he could not find a reason to continue living. No one had ever asked him if he was afraid or not. No matter how powerful the Dingwa prince was, he was only a person. Moreover, when he was injured, he was only an 18-year-old youth. Of course he was afraid. Every time the cold poison flared up, he was afraid that he would never wake up again. He was afraid that the Dingwa household would be destroyed. He was afraid that no one would be able to avenge his brother, his own, and the tens of thousands of Mahist army soldiers. But he could not show his fear in front of anyone. He could only endure. But now his Li, his wife, was sitting by his side and telling him not to be afraid. Okay, don't be afraid. Holding Yi Li's hand, Emo Xiuyao said with a faint smile. Yi Li almost did not want to think about how this day and night passed. In the beginning, Emo Xiuyao's pain was still bearable. She sat by his side and talked to him to distract him. But after midnight, the pain suddenly intensified. Even a tough person like Emo Xiuyao was in so much pain that his entire body was trembling. He could not even speak a complete sentence. Any pain-killing drugs or acupuncture needles would be completely ineffective. Yili could only watch as he tore the brocade quilt on the bed and pulled down the brocade canopy on the bed due to the intense pain. Yili finally couldn't hold back her tears when she saw the usually calm and elegant man's painful and fragile appearance. She had never hated her own powerlessness so much. She vowed that she would accompany him through this pain, but in fact, there was nothing she could do except watch him and prevent him from seriously injuring himself. In just one short night, Yili finally understood what it meant to drag on like a year. When Emo Shuyao fainted from the prolonged pain, she could only carefully let him lean on her body. She didn't even dare to touch him. He could only hope that he would have a short break before the next wave of pain hit him. As expected, less than an hour later, Emo Shuyao woke up. What followed was an even more intense pain than before. This repeated fainting and waking up from pain and then fainting continued until noon the next day before it gradually subsided. When Chief Steward Emo and Xinyang opened the door after noon, they saw the mess in the room. Wang Fei was sitting on the ground next to the bed, her back leaning against the bed as she slept with an exhausted expression. In front of Wang Fei, the prince's head was resting on Wang Fei's lap. Even though he was not sleeping well, it could be seen that he had already fallen asleep. The wounds on his body and hands had already been treated. Seeing this scene, the two men who were almost 100 years old together couldn't help but sigh sadly. Xinyang waved his hand and left the room with Chief Steward Emo. Having just experienced a full moon, Emo Shuyao was once again lying on the bed. This caused Yili, who was already worried about Emo Shuyao's health, to feel even heavier in Yili's heart. "Li, what are you thinking about?" Emo Shuyao lay on the bed and smiled as he looked at Yili, who was holding a book in a daze. Yili raised her head to look at him and said with a frown, "Can your body travel thousands of miles to the Northern Militant Army?" Emo Shuyao smiled, "It's only one night a month. It's much better than before. If it was like last year, I'm afraid it really wouldn't work. Right now, my body is no different from a normal person's. Why can't it?" Yili shook her head. This time she had been by Emo Shuyao's side the entire time. The process had been shocking to her. That kind of heart-wrenching pain was something that even someone like her who had undergone professional torture training would not be able to endure. Furthermore, Emo Shuyao's body was not good to begin with. What was even more frightening was that he had to endure this kind of pain once a month. Just this kind of psychological shadow was enough to drive a person crazy. Looking at Yili's worried and distressed expression, Emo Shuyao smiled faintly. He reached out and pulled Yili to his side and laughed softly. "I once thought that I would never be able to get up in this lifetime. But look at me now. Aren't I fine? So what if I have to suffer this pain once a month? I think it's worth it. Li, I hope that your husband is perfect. Only then can he be worthy of my Li." Emo Shuyao murmured as his slender fingers touched Yili's beautiful lips. Yili turned her head away, not allowing herself to look at the wounds on his hand that had not yet healed. She held back the tears in her eyes and said, "Even if your leg can never recover, I will not despise you." Compared to those so-called healthy young talents, Yili could confidently say that Emo Shuyao was much more outstanding than any of them. She had never thought that Emo Shuyao had to do anything to be worthy of her. "I know, but I hope that Lili has the best," Emo Shuyao said with a gentle smile. Yili was taken aback. She couldn't help but tear up. "What if you spoil her?" Emo Shuyao trapped her in his arms. "As long as Lili wants it, as long as Shuyao has it, I can give it to you. Even if I don't steal it, I will steal it for you." The storm of the betrothal was forgotten by the Ding King's Fu and the Northern Militants' embassy. The capital was still bustling and busy as usual. It was just that there was an additional name of the Ding country's Wang Fei. Although the noble women secretly discussed with contempt and ridicule, who could deny that there was more envy and jealousy? Yili did not pay attention to the outside world. Every day she just took care of the affairs of the Ding King's Fu as usual. When she had time, she would secretly go out of the city to see the people in training. In the blink of an eye, it was already the day for the princess to set off. The day before the departure, the husband and wife who were about to separate did not have time to be alone together. The secret study of the Ding King's Fu was rarely full of people. When Emo Shuyao stepped into the study with Yili, everyone was slightly taken aback before they hurriedly stood up to greet. Emo Shuyao waved his hand and said, "There's no need for unnecessary formalities. Li, you know most of these people. You can also meet the rest." Yili calmly sat beside Emo Shuyao and nodded with a smile. Looking around, she was familiar with the people present, such as Chief Steward Mo Fong San, Leng Haoyu, and a few others. There were a few others that she did not recognize. She turned her head to look at Mo Shuyao in confusion. Mo Shuyao said with a faint smile, "This is General Zhang Qilon. He is in charge of the Maoist army near the capital. This is Sun Yan. He is the commander of the Black Cloud Cavalry. Mo Hua." Mo Shuyao introduced the two middle-aged men who looked extraordinary and called out a name in a low voice. A gray-clothed man suddenly jumped down from the beam and respectfully bowed his head. "Prince Ding, Princess." Mo Shuyao looked at Yi Li and smiled. "This is Mo Hua, the commander of the Shadow Guard." Yi Li nodded and smiled at the three people. These three people were the trusted aides who controlled the true power of the Ding King's Fu, especially Mo Hua. After entering the Prince Ding mansion for more than a year, Yi Li naturally knew that those surnamed Mo in the Ding King's Fu were the most trusted people of Mo Shuyao. They were people who had been loyal to the Ding King's Fu for generations when Mo Shuyao was still alive. It would be difficult for the other party to not make a move. "After I leave the capital, everyone will listen to Wang Fei's orders." Everyone present was stunned. They couldn't help but look at the quiet woman sitting beside Mo Shuyao. Although they admired Wang Fei's performance in the past year, for a 16-year-old woman to control the entire Ding King's residence, people still doubted her ability. Sun Yan frowned and said, "Prince, you mean?" Mo Shuyao didn't immediately answer his question. Instead, he looked at Yi Li and smiled. "Li, is the jade pendant I gave you a few days ago still with you?" Yi Li was stunned. She then remembered what Mo Shuyao was referring to. Lowering her head, she took out a jade pendant from her sleeve and opened it. Everyone looked at it and couldn't help but gasp. In Yi Li's palm was a piece of high-quality mutton fat white jade. That jade wasn't suitable for a woman to use, so Yi Li usually kept it with her and didn't wear it. On the jade pendant, there was a lifelike Yazi carved on it. Yazi, the second son of the dragon, with the head of a dragon and the body of a wolf. Its personality was strong, brave, good at fighting, and bloodthirsty. However, this was the true commander seal of the Ding King's residence. The Maoist army and the Black Cloud Cavalry were the same. They didn't have a common commander seal. Of all the armies, only Prince Ding could move at will. However, there was one exception. That was the Ding country Wang Fei, who held the Yazi jade pendant. Her power was no different than Prince Ding himself. Because of this, the world always thought that Princess Ding could also move the Maoist army and the Black Cloud Cavalry. In reality, there were only one or two Princess Ding who had this power. The reason was that the other Princess Ding didn't have this jade pendant. "Prince, Wang Fei is too young. Is it?" Zhang Qilon said worriedly. The other people didn't speak, but the same thought was written on their faces. Wang Fei did have outstanding abilities. If she could train for a few years, she might be able to hold her own. However, the current Wang Fei, you are only 16 years old. You have only been in the residence for a year. It really made people worried. Feng Jiao stood up with a smile. He bowed to Yi Li and said, "Feng Jiao will follow Prince's orders. I will listen to Wang Fei's orders." Leng Haoyu raised an eyebrow slightly. He followed Feng Jiao and said, "I will follow Wang Fei's orders." Feng Sen Ling Er. Zhang Qilon stared anxiously at the two young people who didn't know the severity of the situation. Feng Jiao leisurely fanned himself and said with a smile, "General Zhang worries too much. Wang Fei's literary and military skills are extraordinary. This year in Yonglin City, she only used 20 to 30,000 soldiers to stop King Li's army of 100,000. She also killed tens of thousands of enemies and even completely destroyed King Li's two flanking armies. Who dares to say that Wang Fei doesn't know the art of war?" Zhang Qilon stilled. He naturally heard about Wang Fei defending Yongzhou. However, he didn't take it seriously. After all, Murongshan was still in Yongzhou and Wang Fei was just a woman. Since ancient times, there was no precedent of a woman on the battlefield. He only thought that Wang Fei and the Black Cloud Cavalry were in Yonglin, so she ordered the Black Cloud Cavalry to help defend the city. However, it was completely different when he heard Feng Jiao say it personally. Feng Jiao had been in charge of the Shadow Guard for many years. It was impossible for him to speak carelessly. The generals who led the troops looked at Yi Li with a trace of inquiry. They were usually in the barracks and didn't have much interaction with Yi Li naturally. They didn't know as much as Feng Jiao, Leng Haoyu and the others. At this moment when they heard Feng Jiao's words, they started to doubt whether Prince's decision was too abrupt. Yili put away the jade pendant again. She raised her head and smiled at the generals. This consort is young and inexperienced. In the future please give me more pointers. Her tone was light and calm as usual, but the generals could acutely feel the sharpness and murderous intent. Those who hadn't been on the battlefield wouldn't have such an aura. This young Wang Fei could even completely restrain this murderous aura. If she didn't do it on purpose, others wouldn't be able to feel it at all. It was as if the woman in front of them was as harmless as they saw her. The generals' hearts trembled and they all lowered their heads. We will obey Wang Fei's orders. Mo Xiuyao looked at the crowd with satisfaction and nodded. Very good. After I leave the capital, everything in the Ding King's Fu will be decided by Wang Fei. Wang Fei's words are I's meaning. Do you understand? The subordinate understands. The crowd said in unison. The secret conversation in the study continued until late at night. After sending everyone off, the two walked out of the study hand in hand and saw a crescent moon in the sky. Yili raised her head to look at the handsome man beside her. Her heart couldn't help but move. A feeling of reluctance spread in her heart. Li, what is it? Mo Xiuyao asked in a light voice. Yili shook her head and shook off the gloom in her heart. I'm worried about you going to the northern tribes. I've picked a few people for you to take with you to the northern tribes. Chapter 293. Mo Xiuyao smiled and asked curiously, what kind of people can make Miss Li feel so assured? Is there some kind of genius that I don't know about? Yili sighed softly and said, if possible I don't want to give them to you because they haven't finished their training and tests. But this time, the emperor definitely won't let you bring too many people from the Prince Ding mansion. The number of guards you have is limited. It's better to bring them along. Mo Xiuyao smiled and said, since Miss Li is so confident, then I also want to see the results of Miss Li in the past month. Yili smiled faintly and raised her hand to tap lightly twice. Mo Xiuyao looked around attentively. His eyes flashed and he said loudly, Shadow Guard alert. In the night, after a few light sounds, everything returned to silence. Not long after, several figures landed from the trees, from the walls and from the eaves. They quickly formed a line and said in a low voice, Gongzi, please instruct us. Yili raised her eyebrows in surprise and said with a smile, to be able to recognize me, it seems that Lin Han and the others have taught me well. Prince, how is it? Mo Xiuyao shook his head helplessly and said, it seems that the Shadow Guard needs to be trained again. These people didn't seem to be very skilled in martial arts, but they were able to silently sneak into the heavily guarded Prince Ding mansion and defeat enemies twice their size. It had to be said that their abilities were shocking. Perhaps the Shadow Guard of the Prince Ding mansion had been too arrogant these past few years. Yili smiled and said, Prince, there's no need to feel depressed. They were able to sneak in because they knew about the guards of the mansion. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion didn't have too many loopholes. Mo Xiuyao said, Li doesn't need to comfort I won't blame them. Where are the guards in the courtyard? A moment later, a dozen shadow guards walked in with their faces covered in dirt. Among them, the shadow guards were so ashamed that they did not dare to raise their heads. They boasted that they were the most powerful guards in the Ding King's residence, but they were caught unprepared under their watch without a sound. If it was really a sneak attack by the enemy, and something happened to the prince and princess consort, even 10,000 deaths would not be enough to atone for their crimes. Mo Xiuyao looked curiously at the 8 people standing in front of him. He felt that these people were completely different from the Mahist army's Black Cloud Cavalry and the Shadow Guard. But he knew that these people were truly chosen from these 3 troops. In less than 2 months they were able to change so much. It had to be said that his beloved consort really knew how to train people. Li, they shouldn't only know how to sneak attack, right? Yili raised her head and said proudly, of course not. Without using any internal energy, just in terms of close combat, each of them can easily fight against 15 elite soldiers. Each of them can skillfully use all kinds of weapons. No matter if it is one-on-one, group attack, night battle, water battle, assassination, ambush, night attack, it is not a problem. As for what else they know, you can tell it to the prince. The soldiers standing in a line started from the first one. Reporting to the prince, this subordinate was originally from the Mahist army. I am good at assassination and ambush. This subordinate also knows the northern tribes and southern Zhao languages. This subordinate was originally from the Black Cloud Cavalry. I am good at archery and close combat. This subordinate was originally from the Shadow Guard. I am good at disguise, qinggong and poison. After listening to their reports, even Emo Xiuyao could not help but sigh in admiration. Li is truly amazing. Are these people really for me? Li glanced at him and said unhappily, otherwise, could it be that I took them out to make you jealous? After saying this, she did not care about Emo Xiuyao's reaction. She looked at the people in the courtyard and said, you are the most outstanding soldiers in the first batch of training. Almost all of you have completed the training ahead of time. Originally, you had a month to learn more skills and then take the test. But now you have to carry out the mission ahead of time. I am very sorry. The leader of the soldiers said, it is our honor to serve the prince and princess. Princess, please give the order. Li nodded and said, very good. From today onwards, you will be the prince's personal bodyguards until the prince returns from the northern tribes. So, your first mission will be to protect him. The goal is to see the prince return to the capital in one piece. Can you do it? Yes, we swear to complete the mission. Everyone said in unison. Li smiled and said, very good. This is not only a mission but also a test for you. Because it is your first mission, I will send Lin Han to accompany you. He is not only your leader but also the person who will test you. Everyone have a safe journey. Thank you, young master. Outside the palace, Princess Ronghua was wearing a red wedding dress with a phoenix and a peony. She tearfully said goodbye to the Empress Dowager and the Emperor-Empress. Princess Zhaoran, who used to be arrogant, finally could not help but cry in the face of her only daughter marrying to the northern tribes. She looked at her daughter who was about to leave but could not say anything. Now it was the Empress Dowager and the Emperor and the Empress who came to send off the princess. Even if she was the biological mother, she could not hold Princess Ronghua back. Princess Ronghua said goodbye to the Empress Dowager, the Emperor, the Empress and her parents one by one. She was supported by the palace maid who accompanied her to the carriage. When she was about to get on the carriage, she looked back in the direction of Li. Li nodded gently and smiled at her. Princess Ronghua looked down and smiled faintly. She resolutely turned and stepped into the carriage. On the luxuriously decorated carriage, the peony curtain embroidered with the noble status of the princess fell gently, covering Princess Ronghua's beautiful face and figure. From now on, she would live in a foreign country as the princess of Dechu State. Perhaps she would never see her parents again. Li, I am leaving. Be careful in the capital. Standing beside Li, Emo Xiuyao whispered softly. Li looked up at the elegant man in a dark green robe embroidered with a silver dragon. She nodded gently and said, I know. You be careful too. Come back early. Emo Xiuyao nodded. I will be careful. Li is alone in the capital. Li interrupted him and said firmly, I will guard the Prince Ding mansion well and wait for you to come back. Emo Xiuyao stilled and said in a low voice, as long as Li is safe, Xiuyao will be very happy. The attendant on the side carefully came over to urge them to leave. He muttered in his heart that it was said that Prince Ding and Wang Fei had a good relationship. Now it seemed that they were inseparable. Li took a step back and left Emo Xiuyao's arms. She tilted her head and said to Lin Han standing on the side, Lin Han, the prince's safety is in your hands. Lin Han nodded and said seriously, Wang Fei, please do not worry. This subordinate will not betray Wang Fei's trust. Li nodded and said goodbye to Emo Xiuyao before retreating into the crowd. Emo Xiuyao turned back to look at her. He led the white horse beside him and mounted it to catch up with the procession that had already left. When the entire procession had disappeared into the distance, Princess Zhaoran finally fell to the ground in tears. Zhaoyang Princess ordered people to help her back to the Princess Fu. The Emperor and Empress also accompanied the Empress Dowager back to the palace. The noisy palace gates instantly became much quieter. Li stood where she was and looked in the direction that Emo Xiuyao had left in. She was silent. Wang Fei, Prince Ding has already left the city. We should return. Chief Steward Emo walked in front of Li and said in a low voice. Li nodded and said, let's return. Emo Xiuyao's sudden absence in Jing seemed to be lonely and bored. Chapter 294. After Prince Ding left the capital, the Ding King's residence closed its doors and declined all visitors as usual. However, only the people in the Ding King's residence knew. In just a short span of 10 days, the number of secret attacks on the Ding King's residence was several times more than the past few years. In the middle of the night, another wave of attacks ended. Yili sat on the chair placed under the eaves and looked indifferently at the men in black who were kneeling on the ground in the courtyard with a solemn expression. On her left and right stood Zhuojing, Qin Feng, Chief Steward Mo Feng Jiao, Mo Hua, Zhang Qilan and Han Mingxi, who were specially stationed in the residence because Prince Ding had left the capital. Other than Feng Jiao, who was smiling as usual, the rest had an ugly expression on their faces. Tonight, the assassins actually broke through the outer perimeter of the Ding King's residence and almost barged into the main courtyard where Yili lived. As the leader of the Shadow Guards, Mo Hua's expression was even uglier. This was simply a slap to the Shadow Guard's face. "Alright, tell me, where did these people come from?" Yili looked at her subordinates' gloomy expressions and asked indifferently. The assassins who were forced to kneel in the courtyard had a flash of disdain in their eyes as they arrogantly tilted their heads to one side. Yili laughed in spite of herself. "It was my slip of the tongue. If I don't ask properly, I don't think you will confess. However, it just so happens that, in these 10 days, there were a total of 7 waves of people who came here. Among them there might be some of your companions. However, there isn't anyone who is strong enough to go against me. Qin Feng, I'll leave it to you." Qin Feng laughed loudly. "Many thanks to Princess. It just so happens that my subordinates are learning how to interrogate. These few days they have improved tremendously. I still have to thank so many people for their contributions." Feng Jiao, who was standing by the side, sneered and pretended to be disdainful, but his eyes were already looking at Qin Feng. "This young master requests to be a spectator." He, Feng Jiao, was known as the most powerful interrogation expert in the Ding King's residence. However, ever since Qin Feng brought back those few brats, he then realized what was called "there was always someone better than you." Moreover, these interrogation experts were mass-produced. Qin Feng looked at him with a fake smile and said, "This is a secret. Outsiders are not allowed to enter." With a wave of his hand, someone came over and stopped the people in the courtyard. Feng Jiao glared resentfully at Qin Feng, who had left in a carefree manner. Then he turned around and looked at Yili eagerly. There was no other way. Ever since Qin Feng followed Wang Fei, no one could speak in front of him except for the prince and Wang Fei. Yili faintly smiled and said, "Feng-san, Qin Feng didn't deliberately make things difficult for you. This is really confidential." Feng Jiao harumphed and said, "It's just an interrogation. Even if they have some unique methods, it can't be considered a secret." Yili smiled and said, "The interrogator is still a secret for now." Feng-san rubbed his nose and didn't speak. He was one of Mo Xiaoyao's most trusted people. Naturally, he knew that Wang Fei had a secret troop of people selected from the various armies of the Ding Wangfu. No one knew what Wang Fei wanted these people to do. Even the prince didn't know what happened to these people after they were selected by Wang Fei. Now, was it these people? Feng Jiao thought of the people that Qin Feng had brought back a few days ago to be interrogated. He had only taken a hurried glance. There didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary. However, Feng Jiao's wariness that had been cultivated after so many years on the battlefield and in secret made him feel that these people weren't simple. Yili stood and smiled to the crowd. "It has been hard on everyone tonight. Let's go sit in the study." Zhang Qilan's expression was ugly as he said, "The prince just left and these people made a move against the Prince Ding mansion. Are we just going to let it go like this?" Yili faintly smiled and said, "General Zhang, don't worry. Naturally, we won't let it go like this. Ben Fei just happens to need some people to practice." Her gentle tone brought out a chilling murderous intent. Everyone couldn't help but be solemn as they followed Yili to the study room. When they returned to the study and sat down, Yili said to Han Mingxi sitting on the side, "It's time to take care of Xiling and Nanjiang. Mingxi, leave Jing tomorrow." Hearing this, Han Mingxi frowned and wanted to say something. Yili shook her head and said, "No need to say more. You have seen the situation in Jing. There's nothing for you to do here. It's better to leave early. Dagu should still be in Yongzhou right now. If there's anything you can't decide, you can take my token to ask him." Han Mingxi looked coolly at her and sighed softly, "I know. I will leave tomorrow. I'm going back to pack first." Yili didn't keep him and just nodded. When Han Mingxi left, the atmosphere in the study immediately warmed up. It wasn't that the people of the Prince Ding mansion didn't trust Han Mingxi and were wary of him, but these people were all born with a pair of astute eyes that could see through the world. Han Mingxi's thoughts were hidden but could not be hidden from these people. But these people were also very loyal to Mo Shuyao. Even if there was nothing between Wang Fei and Han Mingxi, in the eyes of these loyal officials of the Prince Ding mansion, they couldn't help but be colder to Han Mingxi. Yi Li acted as if she didn't see the expressions on everyone's faces as she continued to talk about what happened in the prince's mansion. Everyone was worried about the safety of the Prince Ding mansion. Chief Steward Mo asked, Wang Fei, should we send more shadow guard into the Fu? These days the Prince Ding mansion had been attacked continuously. The guards and shadow guard were probably exhausted. Today assassins had even broken into Wang Fei's residence. Yi Li smiled and said, there's no need to be so troublesome. They worked so hard to sneak into Jing and even risked their lives to break into the Ding Wang Fu that the world knows is impregnable. We have to see what they want to do. Starting tomorrow, catch fewer assassins. Let a few go back. Feng Jiao's eyes flashed and he said with a smile, Wang Fei wants to let people know that the Ding Wang Fu's defenses are gradually weakened? Will the other side believe it? Yi Li smiled and said, since they know they can't break in but still come wave after wave, this Fei will give them a chance. If it was you, would you believe it? Zhang Qilan said worriedly, if this news spreads out, the Wang Fu will be even more unsettled. Yi Li smiled coldly and said faintly, this Fei will let the world know that the Ding Wang Fu is not only impregnable, it is also a hell on earth with no return. Everyone's heart shook as they stared blankly at the gentle and beautiful green-clothed woman in front of them. They were speechless for a long time. Wang Fei. Qin Feng pushed the door open and entered with a strange expression. Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked without surprise, you didn't get anything out of them? Qin Feng said with slight anger, one committed suicide and the rest are just small fries. They don't know anything. Yi Li shook her head and said, that's not right. The one who died was not the leader. Qin Feng looked at Yi Li in confusion. Yi Li said faintly, it's impossible for the other party to not know how powerful the interrogation at the Prince Ding mansion is. If they really wanted to die, they would have killed themselves when they were caught. In terms of experience, you are not as good as Feng San. Feng Jiao looked at Qin Feng proudly and said with a smile, that's right. At least in this young master's hands, there will never be a case of a prisoner committing suicide. At this time, Qin Feng did not care about Feng Jiao's provocation. His sword-like eyebrows were tightly knitted as he said, Princess Consort means that the one who committed suicide was just a cover for the real leader? Yi Li held her chin and said, there is at least a 50% chance. Of course, it is also possible that he was frightened by your methods and coincidentally fell into the hands of a few inexperienced rookies and took advantage of the opportunity to commit suicide. But your methods should not have reached that stage, right? Chapter 295. Qin Feng said with some vexation, those brats just learned this and did not know how to control their strength. They really died. Yi Li lowered her eyes and said softly, we don't lack time now. Let's change the method and take it slow. Change the method? Yi Li said, training the eagle. Training the eagle? Yi Li played with the white porcelain cup in her hand and said softly, light the prison cell until it is as bright as day. Don't use torture anymore. The people in the prison cell will take turns to watch them and change shifts every 2 hours. There is only one point. Don't let me see anyone sleeping until they are willing to speak the truth. Feng Jiao asked in confusion, it's just not sleeping. Is there any use? Yi Li smiled. Young Master Feng San may have tried not sleeping for 1 or 2 days, but has he tried not sleeping for 4 or 5 days? With this method even the proudest eagle can be tamed, let alone a human. Although Feng Jiao had his doubts towards Yi Li's words, Qin Feng did not hesitate to accept it completely. He immediately turned around and gave the order. Feng Jiao turned back to look at Yi Li and said, these few days, does Princess Consort have any thoughts towards these assassins? Yi Li turned back and Zhuo Jing handed over a file. Yi Li opened it and said, these few days, there are all kinds of people who have broken into the residence. There are people who have been hired to kill, people who have come to seek revenge and people who have come to loot a burning house. Loot a burning house. Who has the guts to loot a burning house in the Prince Ding mansion? Mo Hua, who rarely spoke, said with ridicule. Feng Jiao smiled. No one knows if it is really looting a burning house or not. But in these few days, so many lawless people have suddenly appeared in the capital. Are the people stationed in the capital and the capital's magistrate doing nothing? Chief Steward Mo said in a deep voice. The Ding Palace has been attacked repeatedly. Even if the Prince Ding mansion is huge and there are not many manors around, it is impossible for that person in the palace to not know. But after so many days, no one from the palace has come to ask. It's as if nothing has happened. Yili rubbed her forehead and smiled sweetly. That person in the palace probably wants to know how powerful the Prince Ding mansion is. Feng San, send the news out tomorrow. This consort has been frightened for days and is not feeling well. Frightened? Feng Jiao looked strangely at Yili's face. Whether it was Ding Princess Consort or those unlucky assassins that had been frightened these past few days was still debatable. Yili glanced at him. What? This consort can't be frightened? This consort is still a woman, and His Highness is not by my side. So what if the assassins are frightened when they come to our door? Feng Jiao rubbed his nose and said respectfully, No, Princess Consort is too frightened and her body is not in good condition. Yili snorted, Very good, let them be happy for these few days. This consort is frightened and will not see anyone. That's all. Chief Steward Mo hesitated and asked, If the palace summons you? Yili smiled, You are seriously ill and cannot enter the palace. As for the imperial physicians and rewards sent by the palace, they could just accept them. Don't agree to anything else. This old servant understands. Chief Steward Mo nodded. After dismissing everyone, Yili left the study room alone and walked towards the bedroom. She raised her head and looked at the almost full moon and sighed worriedly. She turned her head towards a certain place in the darkness and asked, Why are you following me? Mo Hua's stiff voice came from the darkness. The prince said that he will protect Princess Consort's safety. Yili smiled faintly and ignored him as she turned back to the room. After she was far away, Mo Hua walked out of the shadows and exposed himself to the moonlight. There was clear anger and defeat in his eyes. His ability to hide was not as good as Princess Consort. Princess Consort. In the study, Yili put down the chess piece in her hand and raised her head to look at Qin Feng at the door. What is it? Qin Feng said, The assassins confessed. Mo Hua's eyes lit up as he sat across from Yili. He also put down the chess piece and stared fixedly at Qin Feng. Qin Feng smiled and said, Princess Consort's method is effective. Yesterday at noon some of the assassins couldn't take it. But the leader of the assassins only confessed now. Yili nodded in satisfaction. She put away the chess pieces and the board as she said, Bring him over and bring the confessions of these people as well. Qin Feng nodded and left. Not long later, a man with a haggard and exhausted face was escorted in by 2 guards on the left and right. Just by looking at the man's bloodshot eyes and his vigilant gaze as he stared at Yili, it could be seen that this person had reached his limit. After not eating, drinking, or sleeping for several days, this person was extremely weak both physically and mentally. Even if she let him out, he would immediately fall asleep outside the gates of the Ding King's Fu. Looking with a smile at the man who was forced to kneel on the ground, Yili said with a faint smile, I haven't seen you for a few days. Are you well? The man's bloodshot eyes looked like they were about to spit out fire as he stared fixedly at the green-clothed woman in front of him. Yili did not care at all. She played with the jade bracelet on her wrist and sighed softly, You don't have to look at me like this. I had no choice but to use this method to deal with you. My prince is not here. You have so many people bullying a weak woman like me. It's not honorable, right? The man's spirit was already dispirited. At this time he was still able to raise his spirit to glare at Yili. It was enough to show that he was tough enough. Unfortunately, it had no effect on Yili. Very quickly he gave up and asked in a hoarse voice, What do you want? Yili slowly withdrew her smile and said sternly, Tell me who is the mastermind behind this. I've already said it. Yili sneered. She casually threw the confession in her hand onto the table and said with a smile, In terms of making false confessions, I'm afraid you can't be called an expert. Fujing. And San nodded and said, This subordinate understands. The interrogation and intelligence analysis lessons will be doubled. Yili nodded with satisfaction and glanced at the man on the ground. You still don't want to say it? Then go back and rest. Don't worry, I won't take your life. Let him rest for an hour before starting the interrogation again. Hearing Yi Li's words, the man's face finally changed. Qin Feng frowned and said, "If we let him rest and start again, will it affect the results?" Yi Li smiled and said, "An hour. Don't worry. I believe that after a short rest, this one will be able to understand the wonders of this kind of interrogation." "No, I'll talk." The man's face was ashen. Yi Li said, "Very good. Who sent you? Don't tell me it's the one from the palace. Even though you've just confessed, it's not like your subordinates don't know anything. The leader of the third-ranked assassin organization in the Jianghu Night Kill?" The man's face changed. He looked weakly at Yi Li and hissed, "Wang Fei is truly resourceful." Yi Li smiled and took it as an answer to his flattery. She raised her eyebrows and said with a smile, "Answer?" The man said, "I also don't know who the other person is. But from the appearance and accent, he seems to be from Xiling." Yi Li thought for a moment and asked, "Where else did he contact you?" Chapter 296. The man said, "Yisha is in the south near." When the other party came to find us, Prince Ding had not yet left the capital, so we did not plan on taking this job. However, the other party vowed that Prince Ding would definitely leave the capital within a month. Therefore, they offered a large sum of money to invite us to infiltrate the capital. If Prince Ding had not left the capital, we would not make a move. 10 days ago, Prince Ding had indeed left the capital. We observed for another 10 days and found that the assassins did not know about Yisha. Therefore, we decided to make a move. Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Very good. Where is your leader?" The man was startled and looked at Yi Li in astonishment. Yi Li faintly said, "You guys were able to observe for 10 days before taking action. This consort doesn't believe that the assassins from a few days ago didn't return. This consort doesn't believe that you guys didn't properly assess the strength of the Ding Palace. Knowing that it is impossible to do it, yet you still did it? That can only mean that you are not the true leader of Yisha, right?" Seeing the man lower his head and not speak, Yi Li did not mind. She grabbed a piece of paper from the table and wrote for a while before raising her head and handing it to Qin Feng. "Take him down and ask him according to what is written. If you still can't get anything out of him, then there is no need to bring him back. This consort does not have that much patience." Qin Feng glanced at the paper in his hand and waved his hand at the guard before taking him out. Mo Hua looked at Yi Li and said, "Wang Fei already knew that he was not the true leader? Since that is the case, why waste time on him?" Yi Li smiled helplessly and said, "Although he is only a scout, we really do not know where the rest of Yisha are, right? I feel that, if we can't find these people quickly, we will be in big trouble." Mo Hua gritted her teeth and said, "Even if that person in the palace is not involved, he definitely knows about these people's plan. The Shadow Guard has been obstructed in their search for the past few days. It is definitely that person's doing." Yi Li calmly said, "Has the Shadow Guard reached the point where they can be easily obstructed by the palace guards?" Mo Hua's face was ashen, unable to say anything for a long time. After a long time, he gritted his teeth and said, "I don't know what the princess consort has in mind." Yi Li shrugged and said with a smile, "I don't have any great moves. I'm just going to deal with all changes by sticking to the status quo." Half an hour later, Qin Feng delivered the assassin's confession again. The expression on his face was even more austere than before. Yi Li was not in a hurry to look at the confession and asked, "Is he dead?" Qin Feng shook his head and said, "Not dead, he fainted." Yi Li nodded and lowered her head to look at the confession in her hand. A cold smile gradually appeared on her lips. "Very good." She raised her hand and handed the confession to Mo Hua and Zhuo Jing. The two looked at it and their expressions became heavy. Mo Hua stood and said, "This subordinate will immediately call all the Shadow Guard near the capital back to the Fu." "Stop," Yi Li said calmly. Mo Hua turned around and glared at Yi Li with some anger. "Princess, all the people have already joined forces to attack the Wang Fu. Once they come in, I will make sure they don't return," Yi Li said with a cold smile. Mo Hua stilled as if frightened by Yi Li's unrestrained killing intent. She frowned and said, "Even though the Wang Fu is heavily guarded, it is impossible to guard against so many experts at the same time. It is not just princess's safety, but also many important places in the Fu." Yi Li's smile was warm, but it made the people who heard it feel a chill in their bones. "Don't worry. Send someone to tell General Sun to lead the Black Cloud Cavalry to guard all the exits in and out of the capital. Once the assassins escape, kill them without mercy. The shadow guard will be stationed in all parts of the capital. Once they find someone escaping, kill them. Also, if the shadow guard near the Prince Ding mansion sees the situation in the Fu, immediately surround the king's mansion. No one can enter, no one can leave. This subordinate obeys, Qin Feng and Zhuo Jing said respectfully. Mo Hua looked at the two and also acknowledged. Yi Li nodded and said to Qin Feng, let out all of your people to train. Their first mission is codenamed extermination. Qin Feng nodded excitedly and said, this subordinate understands. This subordinate will not disappoint Princess's trust. Yi Li waved her hand to dismiss the three of them. She raised her head to look at the bright sunlight outside the window and couldn't help but sigh. In a short span of 10 days, the king's mansion had turned into a sea of blood. But, no matter what, she had to protect this mansion. This was not only a grand king's mansion, but it was also her home. Ever since Prince Ding left the capital, the nobles in the capital could clearly feel the gloomy atmosphere of an impending storm. Not everyone was kept in the dark about the continuous attacks on the king's mansion. After all, the commotion caused by the killings was not small. But there was no indication from the palace, so people could somewhat understand the thoughts of that person in the palace. But occasionally there would be a faint uneasiness in their hearts. It was good that nothing happened to the king's mansion. If something really happened, Prince Ding's return would be a very troublesome matter. A few days later, there was news that Princess Ding had been frightened and was bedridden. Even the summons from the palace were all rejected. The king's mansion closed its doors to visitors, so no matter if it was those who were worried or those who wanted to inquire about the news, there was no way to know the real news of the king's consort. Many people also secretly believed the rumor that Princess Ding was seriously ill. After all, she was a teenage girl. No matter how powerful she was, without Prince Ding by her side, even a normal man would not be able to withstand the continuous assassination attempts for 10 days, let alone a girl. Princess, Lord Su from the Imperial Censor's mansion requests an audience. Director Mo respectfully reported. The brush in Yi Li's hand paused and she faintly said, I won't see him. Please ask Lord Su to return. When my body recovers, I will go to the Imperial Censor's mansion to pay my respects to uncle and aunt another day. Director Mo hesitated for a moment and said, Lord Su is very insistent. He also said that if Princess insists on not seeing him, he will immediately enter the palace to meet the Emperor and recount the recent assassination attempts on the king's mansion. In reality, it wasn't that no one had reported this matter to the Emperor, but all the memorials had been kept by the Emperor and not sent out, completely treating it as if there was no such matter. Some of these people were hindered by the Emperor's intentions, some were secretly appeased by people from the Prince Ding mansion. So even though the assassination attempt on the Prince Ding mansion was an open secret, but on the surface, everyone still accompanied the Emperor and acted as if they did not know. Yi Li was silent for a moment and finally said, invite uncle in. Su Hongyan followed Director Mo in. Director Mo excused himself at the door and invited him to enter the study alone. Yi Li put down the brush and stood to greet. Uncle, why have you come? Su Hongyan glared at her in exasperation and said, if I didn't come, I would have left you in the Prince Ding mansion without knowing if you were alive or dead. Yi Li smiled and pulled Su Hongyan into the study to sit down, smiling as she said, what do you mean by alive or dead? Lear is fine. I've made uncle and aunt worried these days. Su Hongyan faintly glanced at her. You know we're worried, but you still stopped your second brother outside. If I personally came today, you wouldn't have sent any news to the family? Yi Li looked with some difficulty at Su Hongyan and said, Uncle, these days my Fu? Su Hongyan frowned and said, these days Jing has been very chaotic. The people in my Fu were sent by you? Yi Li nodded and said, I'm afraid that there will be chaos in the capital in the next few days. Uncle and aunt should be careful. Su Hongyan frowned and said, what does the Emperor mean? Chapter 297. Yi Li smiled helplessly as she said, what other meaning can there be? Using the prince's absence to use someone else's hand to destroy the Prince Ding mansion. Even if the prince comes back, it can't be blamed on the Emperor, right? At that time the prince will either lower his head and swallow this loss. If the prince can't help but attack the Emperor, then the Ding mansion will be ungrateful. Lear will most likely become a femme fatale. How could Su Hongyan not know this? He was even more disappointed in the emperor's actions. Looking at Yili, he asked in a soft voice, "You can't always claim to be sick. What plans do you have?" Yili lowered her eyes and gave a faint smile. "Catch them all in one fell swoop, so that no one in the world will dare to have designs on the Ding mansion." Su Hongyan looked with surprise at Yili. The niece in front of him seemed to be as gentle as before, but the coldness that flashed across her brows let people know that she wasn't as harmless as she appeared on the surface. Su Hongyan sighed and said, "Is it a problem for uncle to stay in your mansion for a few days?" Yili frowned and said disapprovingly, "Uncle, how can this be?" Su Hongyan raised an eyebrow. "Everyone says that the niece is like a mother. Can uncle not enjoy the good fortune of a niece?" Yili grimaced. In the past, when things were going smoothly, she couldn't even invite her uncle and aunt. She was afraid that they would bring trouble to her and the Prince Ding mansion and cause the emperor to be wary. Right now the mansion was in chaos. If her uncle came, he could only be in fear. How could he enjoy the good fortune? "Uncle, in a few days, Lear will bring you and aunt into the mansion to enjoy the good fortune, isn't that fine?" Su Hongyan looked faintly at her. He didn't object or agree. Yili helplessly rubbed her nose and lowered her head. She wasn't unfamiliar with her uncle's expression. It meant that it was useless to say anything. He had already made his decision. Yili could only take a step back and say, "If that's the case, Lear will have people clean up the courtyard for uncle." Qin Feng and Mo Hua. Qin Feng and Mo Hua came in from outside. They looked at Su Hongyan and respectfully bowed. "Greetings to Wang Fei, greetings to Su Darren." Yili waved her hand and said, "There's no need for formalities. Juju will be staying in the Fu for a few days. Mo Hua make the arrangements." Mo Hua nodded. She understood that Wang Fei's meaning was for her to arrange for a shadow guard to secretly protect Su Hongyan. Qin Feng asked, "Wang Fei, should we send more people to protect the Su family and the Yi family?" Yili said, "Mo Hua should send a few more shadow guards to protect Su Furen and Su Gongzi. There's no need for the Yi residents. Who in the capital doesn't know that this consort has a cold relationship with her maternal family? If we send too many people, it will only put them in danger." "I understand. This subordinate will do it immediately." Mo Hua nodded and turned to leave. Qin Feng looked at Su Hongyan and said, "Wang Fei, Su Darren's courtyard is arranged in." Yili said, "Arrange it in the courtyard closest to the main courtyard. In addition, send someone to inform Feng San. Tell him to move faster. The sooner this matter is resolved, the better." Qin Feng's spirit was aroused. He smiled and said, "I understand. I will immediately send someone to inform Feng San Gongzi." These days they had been annoyed to death by wave after wave of assassins. Being able to resolve it all in one go naturally made his mood happy. Turning around to leave, Qin Feng's mood soared. Wang Fei had said the code name, Mia. Therefore the assassins who dared to step into the Fu must not leave alive. Late at night, Ding Wang Fu was silent. In the study room, Yili sat under the lamp. She turned her head to look at Feng Jiao, who was sitting not far away. "Feng San, are you sure it's tonight?" Feng Jiao leisurely waved his fan. His smile made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. The words that came out of his mouth made people tremble with fear. "Wang Fei, don't worry. The capital is only so big. If they don't make a move tonight, they won't have another chance. Tonight the enemy's blood will definitely dye the entire Prince Ding mansion red." Hee. This is a beautiful and mesmerizing color. The capital hasn't been so lively for many years. After so many days of strange happenings, if the Ding Wang Fu's shadow guards still couldn't find them, then the world would think that the Prince Ding mansion's shadow guards were all useless. Yili nodded, "That's for the best. Then we'd better wait for their arrival." Mo Hua looked at the calm and indifferent Yili. Her gaze was complicated. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "Wang Fei and Su Darren should go to a safe place to hide first. There is no lack of top experts among the people who came tonight. If an accident happens..." Yili looked sideways at Su Hongyan, who was calmly drinking tea. She frowned with some worry. She understood her uncle's personality. If she didn't leave, he would definitely not leave. But it was impossible for her to leave now. Seeing her difficult expression, Su Hongyan put down the teacup and said, "Just do your own thing. I'll just sit here for a while and drink 2 cups of tea." Understanding her uncle's meaning, Yili nodded gently and smiled. Since it's like this, Lear will play 2 rounds with Uncle. Su Hongyan nodded and looked at his niece's calm expression with satisfaction. Since she married into the Ding Wangfu and became Princess Ding, then Yi Li's fate was tied together with Prince Ding's. It was also destined that she wouldn't be able to live a peaceful life. Since it was like this, whether it was Su Hongyan or the Su family, they all hoped that Yi Li would be as strong as possible. If she was like her mother, no matter how talented she was, it would be useless if she couldn't survive in this world. Until midnight, the prince's mansion was still silent. Yi Li and Su Hongyan had already played 3 rounds of chess. With 1 win and 1 loss, it looked like they were going to be tied. The 2 were locked in battle. Even Feng Jiao and Steward Mo, who were sitting at the side, couldn't help but go over to watch the game. Feng Jiao would occasionally open his mouth to give advice. Yi Li turned her head and smiled at him. Third young master Feng, a true gentleman doesn't speak when watching chess. Feng Jiao rubbed his nose. This young master is helping you. Yi Li silently rolled her eyes. You're disturbing my train of thought. An extremely soft sound came from the distance. The chess piece in Yi Li's hand paused slightly. Feng Jiao and the others' expressions also froze. Su Hongyan didn't hear anything, but he clearly detected the change in everyone's expressions. He smiled faintly and put down the chess piece, saying, "Let's stop here today. In this year Lear's chess skills have greatly improved." Yi Li smiled and put down a chess piece, saying, "No matter, it won't be too late to finish this game. Mo Hua, go out and take a look." Mo Hua nodded silently, turned and pushed open the door to go out. By the time they finished speaking, the sounds of fighting outside were gradually approaching. Yi Li waved her hand for Qing Wan to put away the chessboard. She stood and walked to the window, pushing it open to look outside. The yard was still shrouded in the faint moonlight, but many places outside the yard were lit with fire. Yi Li lowered her eyes and sighed slightly, saying, "Have them be careful, don't destroy the century-old Prince Ding mansion." Steward Mo respectfully said, "Wang Fei, don't worry. I've already instructed them." Yi Li nodded. She sat by the window, leaning against the window frame, and said with a smile, "That's good. Let's see what kind of people will come tonight." See in this Dechu state just how many people wanted to destroy the Prince Ding mansion. Chapter 298. The sounds of fighting outside the courtyard were getting closer and louder. Su Hongyan stood by the window looking at the flames in the distant sky. He sighed. It seems that the emperor is really planning on watching with folded arms. Yi Li gently shook her head, softly replying, "Jujio, the emperor is not planning on watching with folded arms, but wants to fish in troubled waters." How many of these people do you think came from the palace? How big was Jing City? In the past 10 days, people from all sides had continuously provoked the Ding Wangfu. They had lost no less than 100 people. How many people could still be hiding in Jing City? If it wasn't for the fact that there were capable people behind them, how could so many experts sneak into Jing City so easily? If it was really so powerful, the emperors of the other countries wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Su Hongyan was startled. In the end, he could only give a long sigh. Why is the emperor doing this? When the first assassin crossed the wall of the main courtyard, Yi Li stood up again and walked outside. The Yahuan beside her quickly followed. Yi Li waved her hand, "Don't go out." Qing Wan said, "Usually we can't help. Now that Wang Fei doesn't let us follow in the Fu, Newbie feels that we are useless. Qing Shuang and Qing Xia don't know martial arts, so stay in the room. Newbie and Qing, you should follow Wang Fei." Seeing her so insistent, Yi Li frowned slightly but didn't say anything else. She turned and walked out of the study. In the courtyard, Xue Jing and Feng Jiao came to greet her. Seeing Yi Li come out, Feng Jiao said, "There are a few groups of people heading towards the ancestral hall. They should be there to enshrine the embracing cloud sword. The others are heading towards the main courtyard, but there are a few who went to the library." Yi Li smiled faintly. "No matter why they came, if they all stay, don't think of leaving alive." "Yes." Feng Jiao laughed loudly. He cupped his hands towards Yi Li and flew out of the courtyard. His red robe faintly carried a cold and bloody aura. Gradually, the sounds of fighting gathered outside the main courtyard. The guards of the Prince Ding mansion seemed to be unable to hold on any longer. Yi Li stood under the eaves. Although she couldn't see the situation outside, she could hear the sounds of fighting and smell the thick scent of blood carried by the night wind. Suddenly, a few black shadows broke through the walls of the courtyard and leaped in. They almost immediately saw Yili standing under the eaves, dressed in white. A few dark figures pounced towards Yili at the same time. Their lightning-fast momentum made it clear that they were not ordinary assassins but real experts. Yili's literary style did not change, as if the murderous intent surging towards her did not exist at all. Just as the black shadow was about to reach her, Zhuojing, who was standing beside her, suddenly moved. He raised his hand and a cold light flew out from his sleeve and swept towards the person in front. At the same time, in the shadows, several sharp arrows shot out. The arrows were neatly arranged in a row and stabbed into the ground in the same direction. They drew a straight white line between the two sides as a warning to stop. The leader of the black-clothed men stood still and swept his eyes over the arrows on the ground. He raised his left arm and a long tear appeared on the sleeve of his left arm. The guards of the Ding King Fu, you truly live up to your reputation, the black-clothed man said in a deep voice. Yili pursed her lips and smiled slightly. You flatter me. The black-clothed man's sharp eyes narrowed slightly and a cold light appeared in his eyes. The Ding King's consort? Yili nodded and smiled faintly. That's right. How do I address you? The black-clothed man snorted. You don't need to know who I am. You just need to know that I am the person who came to take your life. Yili did not care about his threatening words. She raised her eyebrows and smiled. Oh? Coincidentally, Ben Fei also wants to know how many people want to take Ben Fei's life. Since you have come, then stay here with me. She raised her hand and a red light whistled out with a sharp sound into the night sky. A giant red flower bloomed in the sky. The strange red color instantly covered the sky of the Ding King Fu, making the people who looked up suddenly have an ominous premonition. The black-clothed man was alert. He did not look at the night sky but looked around vigilantly. There seemed to be something in the darkness. The black-clothed man wanted to listen carefully. But at this time there was killing outside. Even if he had deep internal energy, he could not hear anything. On the wall, Feng Jiao's red clothes sent an assassin flying. He looked admiringly at the sky and smiled. Wang Fei, what kind of flower is this? It is very beautiful. Ben Gongzi will make a robe later and embroidered with this kind of flower. Yili's mouth couldn't help but twitch. She said faintly, this is the red spider lily, also known as the red spider lily. The only scenery on the road to the underworld is also known as the flower of death. Feng Jiao's body paused and he almost fell off the wall. He laughed dryly. Wang Fei really knows how to joke. Feng Sen, are you here to play? It was unknown when Mo Hua appeared on the wall. She looked down coldly at the people in the courtyard. Daring to break into the main courtyard of the Ding King Fu. You're really tired of living. Zhang Qilon was dressed in a battle robe. He held a long spear and stood at the corner of the eaves. He was originally tall and sturdy. His entire life of military training had been refined into a baleful aura. At this time, standing on the eaves, he had the intention of sweeping through the 6 directions. The black-clothed man quickly found that he had been surrounded by the experts of the Ding King Fu. Under normal circumstances, he should immediately go forward and capture Princess Ding as a hostage to escape. But seeing the Ding King Fu leisurely standing under the eaves with only 2 women and 1 man, he suddenly hesitated. Was it really right to go forward? Could it be another trap? Princess Ding is so scheming. After enduring for so many days, it was actually just to lure us into a trap? The black-clothed man stared at Yili. Yili laughed crisply. It's nothing. Compared to all of you, my prince has not left the capital and all of you are busy scheming. The prince has just left and all of you have come to bully me, a weak woman. This consort feels that this is already kind enough. These days all of you must have played enough. Now, why don't you take a look at my Ding King Fu's handiwork? Outside the wall, the guards of the Prince Ding mansion who were gradually unable to resist suddenly became more courageous. In the darkness, countless people once again joined in. The situation outside seemed to have turned around in the blink of an eye. No more assassins attempted to jump over the high wall and break into the main courtyard. More wanted to escape. But at the same time, the Ding King Fu's elite shadow guard appeared at the exit. Attacking from both sides, the Ding King Fu became even more lively. Understanding that they were trapped inside, the black-clothed men in the courtyard started to become anxious. A few did not think carefully and raised their weapons to charge in the direction of Yili, Zhuojing and Qing Wan, who were beside Yili. calmly went up to meet them. On the high wall, Feng Jiao frowned as he looked at the situation in the courtyard. He found that there was no need for him to intervene. He turned his head to observe the situation outside the courtyard. He saw a few figures quickly fly past, leaving a ground full of black-clothed corpses. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. Wang Fei has good methods. If the Mahist army had such skills, would there be any need to worry about the world being unstable? Mo Hua stood beside him and followed his gaze. His expression changed slightly and he remained silent. Chapter 299. Yili silently watched as the black-clothed men died under the arrows. She raised her head to look at the remaining people. The leader of the black-clothed men chuckled and said, "Good, as expected of the Ding Kingdom, as expected of the Black Cloud Cavalry. However, does the princess think that we only have these preparations?" Yili slowly walked down from the roof and calmly looked at the black-clothed men. "No matter how much preparation you have, I don't plan on letting you leave alive today. You should be the true leader of the night assassins, right?" The black-clothed man was startled and quickly smiled. "It seems that my people have already told the princess everything. Good method. Since that's the case, then let's see who's the real deal." After speaking, the black-clothed man suddenly flew up and pounced at Yili. During this time he even dodged the 2 arrows that were shot from the shadows. Zhuojing frowned and raised his hand to signal for the arrows to stop. Yili calmly looked at the black-clothed man's ferocious momentum. She slightly moved her body to the side to avoid a knife. Her sleeves fluttered and a silver knife flew towards the black-clothed man's wrist. A trace of astonishment flashed through the black-clothed man's eyes. He turned the large knife in his hand and cut off Yili's attack. Yili lightly snorted and the dagger in her hand blocked the large knife. She then let go of the dagger and quickly used her other hand to stab at the black-clothed man's left ribs. Yili's dagger was originally made by an expert Mo Shuyao using cold iron essence according to her own drawing. Not only was the style strange, but it could also cut through iron like mud. The moment it collided with the large knife, sparks flew everywhere. It actually didn't fall and left a trace of a scar on the knife. The dagger itself was still in perfect condition and was still emitting cold light. The black-clothed man quickly dodged Yili's attack and the gaze he used to stare at Yili became even more dangerous. Originally, he didn't put this princess consort of Ding in his eyes because this princess Ding's internal energy couldn't even be considered an expert. Could only be considered not bad. But in just a short exchange, Princess Ding, who didn't rely on her internal energy at all, almost made him suffer. If this woman had a high level of internal energy, the black-clothed man didn't dare to think that he would be her opponent. Yili did not intend to fight the other party head-on. She knew when to stop and quickly retreated to a safe distance. He looked at the black-clothed man indifferently and said with a smile, "The leader of the night killers is only he. Take him down." "Yes." Zhuojing nodded and gestured into the darkness. In the darkness, a few figures quietly appeared in the courtyard and started to fight with the black-clothed men without saying a word. These people's martial arts were very similar to Yi Li's. Strictly speaking, they were far from being a match for the black-clothed men. However, they were very accurate and fast, which made people speechless. As long as a blade, palm, or circle hit the black-clothed man, it would definitely cause a lot of damage to him. However, they cooperated with each other very well. In addition, they had the secret help of a master archer. In less than a quarter of an hour, they took down all the assassins in the courtyard. Only 2 of them suffered light injuries. The leader of the night killers had his acupuncture points sealed and was tied up in a strange way with a rope. Yili walked over and said with a faint smile, "I heard that the true identity of the leader of the night killers is very mysterious. Even the Tianyi Pavilion, which is known to be the most well-informed in the world, doesn't know. It seems that this consort will be able to solve this mystery today?" Zhuojing reached out and untied the mask on the black-clothed man's face, revealing a 40-something-year-old face with a determined expression. Yili calmly looked at the stranger in front of her. Feng Jiao, who had been standing on the wall and watching them the entire time, actually fell down from the wall this time. He stared at the black-clothed man and cried out in alarm, "Mu Qingcong." Feng Jiao fell into the courtyard and frowned as he looked at the black-clothed man in front of him. Hearing this, Yili raised her eyebrows with interest and said with a faint smile, "De Chu State's #1 expert. Mu Qingcong?" You're even willing to send out such a top expert. Your Highness really thinks highly of this consort. Mu Qingsong's expression was cold as he said faintly, "This one doesn't understand what princess means. The night killers are paid to do things. What does it matter if your Highness or not?" Yili raised her eyebrows and looked at him with a faint smile in her eyes. She didn't know why, but Mu Qingsong seemed to be unable to withstand her gaze and turned his head away in a somewhat awkward manner. Yili tilted her head and sized him up a few times. She smiled faintly and said, "De Chu State's #1 expert? This consort seems to have exaggerated a bit, right? What right do you have to say that?" A trace of anger flashed through Mu Qingsong's eyes. He once again turned his gaze to Yili and glared at her. Princess Ding could insult his actions and even his character, but she absolutely could not insult his dignity as De Chu State's #1 expert. He swept his eyes over the people standing around him and sneered, "Just based on these juniors." Halfway through his words he met Yi Li's mocking gaze and swallowed the rest of his words with an ugly expression. Regardless of how these people caught him, it was a fact that they caught De Chu State's #1 expert without any losses. Since ancient times, there was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. Even if you had the ability to reach the heavens, a loss was a loss. Yi Li nodded and said with a smile, "They were indeed lucky to have defeated you today, but you better believe me. Not to mention one Mu Qingsong, even if there were a few more Mu Qingkangs, this princess would still capture them." Mu Qingsong sneered, obviously not believing her. Yi Li did not get angry and continued, "This consort said that you are De Chu State's #1 expert was exaggerated. It is not because you lost to them. It is because you are already old." Mu Qingsong's heart skipped a beat. His face twisted and gradually became ashen. He was not yet 40 years old and was not considered old for someone who practiced martial arts. However, he was indeed old. Of the 4 great experts in the world, the oldest was Xiling Genom, Prince of Gojoseon. Although he lost an arm in a battle with Mo Lufang in the past, he had real power over Xiling and was famous for his fighting prowess. The second was Yanwang Chamber's master Ling Taihan. Although they were both Jianghu people, Yanwang Chamber's name shook Jianghu. Even the nobles of the 4 countries did not dare to lightly offend them. The youngest was De Chu State's Prince Ding Yamo Xiuyao. Although he was seriously injured and crippled in his youth, his name shook the world in his youth and he was known as the young god of war. As for him, he was a few years older than Ling Taihan. Although he had the title of De Chu State's #1 expert, he could only watch over a single night and slowly grow old. He could neither fight on the battlefield nor roam Jianghu freely. When people talked about the title of De Chu State's #1 expert, they would often sigh with regret. If not for Prince Ding's misfortune, De Chu State's #1 expert would have long been replaced. Yi Li looked at the defeated middle-aged man in front of him with some regret and secretly sighed in his heart. Mu Qingsong's ability and ambition should have been a formidable person. Unfortunately, he could only be controlled by others and was in a dilemma. The title of De Chu State's #1 expert was not so easy to hold. "Since I lost to you, you can kill me or cut me up as you wish," Mu Qingsong said coldly. His eyes were dim and there was a sense of discouragement. Yi Li waved his hand and said indifferently, "Take him away. Mr. Mu, Yi Li respects you as an expert. It's best if you don't act blindly without thinking and do stupid things like suicide or escape." Mu Qingsong snorted softly and allowed the guards beside him to take him away. Feng Xiao finally came back to his senses. He patted the non-existent dust off his body and rubbed his forehead as he walked over. That person, how could that person be Mu Qingsong? Chapter 300. Yi Li smiled and said, "Why can't it be Mu Qingsong?" Feng Xiao lamented. "He is Mu Qingsong, the #1 expert in De Chu State. He has a noble character and unquestionable integrity, and is unmoved by power. Back then the emperor used the position of a general to recruit him as an official, but he refused because he had no interest in the bureaucracy and only focused on martial arts. Seems that he studied for so many years to study how to be an assassin." Although Yisha was indeed not bad, it was still far from the Yanwang Chamber of Commerce, which was also an assassin organization. Yi Li lowered her eyes and her red lips slightly hooked up. When awake he holds the power of the world and when drunk he lies on a beauty's knee. The pursuit of all men in the world is nothing more than this. Mu Qingsong doesn't love power or beauty. Do you think this is possible? He loves martial arts. How much better do you think his martial arts is compared to the other three experts? Yili asked with a sidelong glance. Feng Jiao rubbed his nose and remained silent. Mu Qingsong's martial arts were indeed very high, but as the #1 expert in Dechu State, Feng Jiao clearly felt a little disappointed. This was because he wasn't much better than the other three experts, and was even somewhat lacking in some aspects. The other three were all busy people who were burdened with affairs. In comparison, Mu Qingsong seemed even more inferior to his reputation. How does Wang Fei plan to deal with Mu Qingsong? He is a member of the Mu family. What's wrong with the Mu family? Yili asked with a smile. Feng Jiao frowned and said, although we don't fear the Mu family, it's always troublesome to have one more enemy. The Mu family has always been neutral. If because of him... Yili shook her head and said, Feng-san, Mu Qingsong's appearance here doesn't make you think of something? With Mu Qingsong's background, do you think he would really go against the Ding royal estate for money? Feng Jiao was startled and his expression sank slightly. It wasn't that he couldn't think of it, but he didn't want to think about it. Although he was not a blood relative of the Ding royal estate, he had grown up with Mo Xiuyao. He knew very well how much the Ding royal estate had sacrificed for the Dechu state. He had even contributed to this effort. Therefore, every time he saw those people who used to be on good terms with Ding country manor without any scruples, he felt not only disappointment and anger, but also endless coldness in his heart. Yili said indifferently, eating from the monarch is a matter of loyalty to the monarch. Feng Jiao shook his head and waved away the displeasure in his heart. He raised an eyebrow and smiled. What plans does Wang Fei have? Yili smiled and said, what plans could I have? If the Mu family could afford it, they would return Mu Qingsong to them, so as to avoid hurting the harmony between the two families. If you can't afford it, then there's no need for me to leave a powerful enemy alive in this world, right? When the sounds of fighting outside completely disappeared, it was already close to 5 o'clock in the morning. In the distant horizon, there was already a faint trace of light. Yili led people out of the main courtyard. The thick smell of blood spread in the air. Standing in front of the full moon gate outside the main courtyard, blood flowed like a river and corpses were everywhere. Qing Wan and Qing Yu, who were following behind Yili, couldn't help but rush to the side and vomit when they saw the scene in front of them. Yili closed her eyes. When she opened them again, there was only a cold light flowing in her eyes. Greetings, Wang Fei. Everywhere in the courtyard, people holding swords and sabers looked at the white-clothed woman standing at the gate and greeted her respectfully. Yili looked solemn and nodded slightly. Thank you for your hard work tonight. Zhang Qilan was bathed in blood and sternly said, protecting the Ding royal estate is the responsibility and glory of our Mahist army. Wang Fei's words are too serious. Reporting to Wang Fei, the emperor is here. The steward outside hurried in. Although he was in a hurry, he still didn't lose his composure. Yili was a little surprised. She raised an eyebrow and said, the emperor is here? The steward nodded and said, yes, the emperor is already 2 li away. Should we go out to welcome him? Yili smiled and said, since the emperor left the palace so late at night to come to the Ding royal estate, how can we, as officials, not go out to welcome him? Director Mo, first bring people out to welcome the emperor. Director Mo respectfully acknowledged and waved his hand to bring people out. Yili looked at the people in the courtyard and pursed her lips with a smile. Everyone, go out to welcome the emperor. Outside the magnificent Ding royal estate, the corpses on the wide street had already been quickly moved away. However, the street that was dyed red with blood wasn't so easily cleaned up. The dark red blood stains appeared even more eerie and cold under the light of the lamps. The dragon carriage slowly approached under the protection of a large group of imperial guards. The eunuch outside lifted the carriage curtain and Mo Jingqi walked out with his head lowered. When he bent down and saw the dark red blood on the ground, his expression couldn't help but change. He frowned at Director Mo, who was respectfully welcoming him, and asked, where is the Ding royal consort? Director Mo said in a low voice, her royal consort has suffered a shock and is disheveled. Please forgive her for coming late. Mo Jingqi was startled and immediately smiled. It's good that she's safe and sound. Prince Ding isn't in the capital. If anything happens to her, we won't be able to answer to Prince Ding. Seeing Mo Jingqi being helped down from the dragon carriage by the eunuch, Director Emo took a step back and lowered his head, saying, "Thank you for your concern, Your Majesty. Please come in." Naturally, Emo Jingqi wasn't the only one who came along. Following behind the dragon carriage were the officials and nobles of the capital. At this moment, no matter what they were thinking, they all revealed a worried and relieved expression on their faces. Director Emo only saw a pair of old eyes that had seen the world and didn't have the slightest bit of warmth. Emo Jingqi turned back and said to the officials, "Since that's the case, everyone follow us in to visit her." Zhang Qilan stepped forward and frowned, saying, "Your Majesty, Prince isn't in the capital right now. Isn't it inappropriate for so many officials to enter the Ding royal estate together?" Emo Jingqi's eyes flashed slightly. He stared at Zhang Qilan, asking, "General Zhang? We remember that you control tens of thousands of soldiers near the capital. Why are you here?" Zhang Qilan didn't evade, saying seriously, "Before Prince left, he entrusted me with the safety of the Ding royal estate. Recently, the Ding royal estate hasn't been peaceful, so I led people back to the capital to guard the Ding royal estate. This matter. I've sent a memorial to Your Majesty, but I haven't received Your Majesty's decree. However, the safety of the Ding royal estate is as important as Mount Tai, so I can only return to the capital to ask Your Majesty for punishment." Emo Jingqi only felt a mouthful of blood in his heart. Zhang Qilan's memorial was probably sent along with the other memorials about the Ding royal estate being assassinated. He was too lazy to even look at such memorials and directly threw them to the side. However, right now he couldn't deny and punish Zhang Qilan in front of everyone because Zhang Qilan had sent a memorial to him. If he didn't agree, it would be premeditated to the death of the Ding royal estate. Even though these were his true thoughts, he couldn't let others know. Forcing a smile, Emo Jingqi said, "General Zhang's words are too serious. General Zhang wholeheartedly serves the country and is a role model for our Dechu state's generals. Today you've done well in protecting the Ding royal estate. We'll reward you handsomely in the future." Before Zhang Qilan could express his gratitude, an elegant female voice sounded from inside. "Your Majesty is wise. Yili will thank Your Majesty on behalf of General Zhang. Your Majesty is wise. Yili will thank Your Majesty on behalf of General Zhang."